you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who take on my hate. Look me better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper than
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 6th part of What If Deku Learns Under the Batman. Smash the like, share, and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. End of the beginning, beginning of the end. All Might and Batman stood next to each other in silence in the elevator as it descended downward. The building they were in was a top-secret facility that not even most pros knew about. They were in the highest security prison in the country. It was a place where they housed their most dangerous criminals in the country, and all of them who had entered never saw the light of day again. A place where villains were sheltered away from the society they tried to destroy forever with no hope of escape. A veritable purgatory on Earth, Tartarus. And the man they were seeing could be Hades himself. The elevator door opened and Batman and All Might stepped through. They were greeted briskly by the guards and informed that they would only get 10 minutes with the prisoner. They were led into a large hallway lined with numbered vaults. The hallway and the vaults were all layered with reinforced titanium strong enough to withstand a nuclear blast. And the tempered glass viewing windows were only used when under heavy guard and with a hero present. Truly, thought All Might, this is a place of no return. They made their way to the end of the hallway to one of the largest vault doors, which slowly opened as they approached. Sitting in a small wheelchair attached to several medical devices sat All Might's longtime foe and nemesis, All For One. Despite the fact that gnarled skin had replaced his eyes long ago, he smiled under his oxygen mask at the approach of the two heroes. "It's about time I received visitors," he said. "I've been quite lonely, and by two prominent members of the hero community, no less. The infamous Dark Knight," he motioned his head to Batman, "and the symbol of, forgive me, the X symbol of peace." He added shrewdly to All Might, "The second semester must be starting soon. I would have figured you would devote yourself to teaching, but instead you come to visit me." "We're here to get a few things straight," said All Might. "You have no idea how stifling it is in here," said All For One. "If I so much as try to scratch an itch, then every gun muzzle in this cell immediately points at me." He moved slightly in his chair, and true to his word, the automatic guns immediately honed in on his position. "My brainwaves and vital signs are being constantly monitored by these machines. One thought about activating my quirk and I'll likely be put down like a rabid dog. Even I would have a hard time getting free." "You're trapped here," said Batman. "I've made sure of it. You'll never go free." "I'll let you believe that," said All For One, laughing softly. "So what do you have to say?" "I want answers," said All Might. "And I'll happily give them to you," said All For One. "That's very forthcoming of you," said Batman. "Don't feel flattered," said All For One. "It's nice to have someone to talk to." "Where is Shigaraki hiding?" said Batman. "Haven't the slightest," said All For One. "Unlike your bird, mine has left the nest. Tell me, how is young Midoriya? I do hope he is enjoying the use of his friend's quirk." "You haven't had a Robin with superpowers yet, have you, Batman? That'll disrupt the balance of power for sure. Mention him again and you won't have to worry about the guns around you ever again," snarled Batman. "Quaint, Batman. But Brainiac has told me everything there is to know about you, and unlike me, you have a rule against killing," said All For One, yawning. "Still, it wasn't my intention to hurt young Midoriya. I simply saw this as an opportunity too delicious to pass up. The boy is already so strong on his own, thanks to your training, Batman. I felt he simply deserved to have a power to match that strength, considering that he didn't want to be the next holder of One for All." "Yes, I do know about that," he added to All Might at his surprised look. "The boy told me many things during his time with us. His connection to you is palpable, despite his hatred for you. Your body no longer supports One for All, but it is still there, so he obviously rejected your most gracious offer to be the next symbol of peace." "What else did he tell you?" said Batman. "Many things," said All For One. "But strangely enough, he did not divulge your identity, nor the identity of your cohorts, despite all my attempts to persuade him." Batman's mind immediately flashed to Jason, and a sense of sadness swept over him. Midoriya endured torture and brainwashing at the hands of a villain, just as Jason did. "Perhaps if I had a little more time with him, I could have pried it out of him," continued All For One. "But alas, time was short." "What were you trying to achieve?" said All Might. "What are you hoping for now? You devote your time to exploiting and controlling people, toying with innocent lives for no reason. Why?" All For One let out a deep sigh. "Of course you would come here with a tired topic. Even if I told you, you wouldn't be satisfied. There are some people who will never understand each other. His smile deepened under his oxygen mask. We are the same, All Might. You would never admit it, but it's the truth. We are not the same, snapped All Might. Really, laughed All For One. Just as you long to be the symbol of peace and justice, I too had an ideal dream and the power to see it enacted, thanks to Brainiac. A dream of a world remade in our image. If I could live forever inside my dream, then why would I begrudge the effort to make it a reality? Why would you need a successor, then? Said All Might. You, of all people, ask that. Said All For One. It is to laugh. Look at my body. I may be alive, yes, but only because of tubes and machines. My infinite potential, the potential to make my dream a reality, suddenly became finite. Just as Brainiac passed his power on to me when he was destroyed, I will pass on my legacy to Tamura. Let's go, All Might, said Batman, turning to leave. This is pointless. Oh, don't put a damper on things, said All For One. I want to keep talking. The world was probably shaken up by your retirement. So tell me, how are things actually looking on the outside? We are keeping him isolated from the news, a voice over the intercom said immediately. Please refrain from giving him any information. You've heard the man, said All Might. No matter, said All For One. I have an active imagination. Their worry about your sudden absence is mixing with their worry about Endeavor as the new de facto leader, and making them question the unity of hero society in Japan. Meanwhile, those who are lurking in the shadows are compelled to act in the wake of the vacuum of power you left when you retired. They think this could be their chance to change how the world works and are starting to band together. They can try, said Batman. They'll fail. I'm sure most of them will, said All For One. In answer to your previous question, I think Tamura will continue to hide for the time being. He's going to try to ensure that it's their organization that rises to the top. We're leaving, All Might, said Batman. Both of them stood and walked towards the door as All For One continued to laugh. Do you know what I love about this the most? Said All For One, calling after them. Any rise in crime moving forward is due to you concealing your fading strength. And now, you've been relegated to the sidelines, doomed to watch as villains flourish because of your own arrogance, powerless to the end of your days. All Might paused briefly as he walked, but said nothing, and continued to follow Batman out of the cell. Izuku was lying in a hospital bed in Kamino General Hospital, placed under heavy armed guard. It had been 3 days since the incident with All Might and All For One at Kamino Ward. As soon as it was safe, Alfred had received orders from Bruce to take Izuku directly to the hospital, where he was met by both Bruce and Detective Tsukachi. They had to completely debrief him on the events that transpired during his capture. The truth was, Izuku couldn't remember much after his meeting with All For One. It was assumed this was an after effect of the brainwashing. The media was already calling what had happened the Kamino Ward incident. All For One was taken into custody after the battle and didn't put up a struggle. The casualties as a result of the battle were significant, more so than had been seen since All Might's debut. The news outlets ran continuous reports on the symbol of peace, who was taken to the hospital and reported to be in stable condition. The world continued to praise All Might for his actions, but with the seemingly abrupt loss of his power and retirement, many of the news outlets began to question his fitness to continue teaching at UA. Some believed that UA's troubles began once he was hired on his staff. Since the battle, Izuku had yet to hear from Bruce since they debriefed him at the hospital, though he was visited by Alfred, Dick, Barbara, and his mother shortly after he was admitted. His injuries he had sustained from the attack on the training camp had all but healed inexplicably during his incarceration. He was having difficulty sleeping, plagued by a recurring nightmare, a frightening hand reaching for him, immobilized and helpless as it changed him, warped him into something else, something unnatural. Several doctors continuously came in and out of his room to examine him. Each one of them were more baffled than the last. Izuku had become patient zero overnight for a condition that the scientific community hadn't believed was possible: quirk appropriation. For all intents and purposes, Izuku was healthy. The quirk had completely bonded with him as if he had been born with it. But to Izuku, it was as if a foreign entity had invaded his body. He would often watch his hands as they sparked and crackled when he activated the quirk, but it made him sick to his stomach. Every drop of nitroglycerin-like sweat that dropped from the pores of his hands seemed to scream at Izuku. This quirk does not belong to you, Mr. Midoriya. Izuku was shaken from his thoughts as one of the officers assigned to him had entered his room. He was tall with a cat-like face and a bell attached to his neck. You have a few visitors here to see you. I don't want to see anyone right now, thank you, said Izuku. I think this one you might, said the officer, stepping aside. Several bodies began pouring into the room, shouting his name. Class 1 had come to visit their friend. Guys, you're all here, said Izuku. We wanted to see you sooner, but the police wouldn't let us, said Uraraka. Are you doing okay? Yaoyorozu. Thanks to you, said Izuku, motioning to her, Todoroki, Kirishima, Uraraka and Ida. You broke the rules, Izuku added seriously. You could have gotten in serious trouble. We knew the risks, said Todoroki. We had to come save you, said Kirishima. You would have done the same for any one of us. We all saw what happened on TV, said Mainta. We agreed we weren't going to talk about that, Mainta, said Asui. No, it's okay, said Izuku. You don't have to pretend. The whole country, no, the whole world saw me attack All Might. He added bitterly. That wasn't you, said Uraraka immediately. They did something to you, it wasn't your fault. Izuku turned away. Everyone had been telling him that since he had returned to the warehouse, but somehow he didn't believe it. He had been playing the event over and over in his mind, and he could come to no other conclusion. He was the reason the villains attacked the camp. He was the reason his classmates got injured. He was too weak to defend himself and his friends against their enemies, despite all his training. And worst of all, it was because of his weakness that the country no longer had the symbol of peace. You were able to break free, said Todoroki. You fought against his mind control just like at the sports festival. You broke free and fought back against them. I've never seen anything like it, said Takoyami. So, it's true, said Kaminari slowly. What they've been saying. Do you have a quirk now? Izuku paused, then raised his outstretched hand. His classmates gasped in awe as they saw the sparks crackle and pop from his palm. How? Said Yaoyorozu, astonished. It's complicated, said Izuku. Explosions, said Mainta. Kinda on the nose when you think about it. That's no accident, said Izuku. What do you mean? Asked Shoji. Wait, said Kirishima. Didn't you say you had a friend with an explosion quirk? Izuku fell silent, a dark shadow creeping over his face. After a moment, Ajiro cleared his throat. Maybe we should let Midoriya get some rest, he said. He's been through a lot. The rest of the group murmured words of encouragement to Izuku as they left. But Uraraka, Kirishima, Ida, and Todoroki stayed behind. Deku, said Uraraka. Is it true? Izuku didn't need her to elaborate on her question. Yes, he said. How is that possible? Said Ida, shocked. I don't know, said Izuku. He seemed to know everything about me. He knew about Kak, the name stuck in his throat, the quirk's previous holder. He knew my connection to him. This was all part of some twisted ploy. Izuku felt tears running down his cheeks as he lifted his hands to his face. All my life I waited and wished desperately for a quirk of my own, and this is how it happens, he said through the sobs. I'm not worthy of this quirk. I don't want it. I don't know what to do. Uraraka and Kirishima sat down next to Izuku on his bed, comforting him through his sobs. Izuku had been bottling this for a while. He hadn't told Bruce, Alfred, or even his mother. Make it your own. Izuku looked up to Todoroki. That's what you said to me at the sports festival, he said. It's your quirk, not his. I can't understand the circumstances of which you have received this quirk, but I can understand the feelings that come with an unwanted quirk. But if you are true to your own word, then it does not matter where this quirk came from. It's your quirk now, Todoroki, said Ida. Don't be insensitive. I'm sorry, said Todoroki, but it is the truth. This is no longer your friend's quirk, it is yours. Fighting against it will only hurt you in your growth as a person and a hero. He placed his hand on Izuku's shoulder. I lived my whole life hating my father's quirk only for you to help me realize that I don't have to, because it's my quirk and not his. You don't have to go through what I went through. You have your friends, Deku, said Uraraka. That's right, said Ida. We will help you through this. We're here for you, man, said Kirishima, patting him on the shoulder. Izuku felt his tears flow freely, but they were no longer tears of pain and sadness. All Might was walking down the street toward Izukumidoriya's apartment. They had released him yesterday, and today he and Aizawa were meeting with the students' parents to discuss a new policy implemented by Principal Nezu in an attempt to increase student safety while attending UA on-campus dormitories. To their surprise, the students' parents had all been supportive of UA, most likely due to All Might's heroic actions at Kamino Ward. He had given up everything trying to save them from a seemingly impossible-to-beat villain. Even without his powers, and despite all the bad press, they still trusted UA enough to guide their children in these frightening times. It was a humbling experience for All Might. But then there was Midoriya's mother. He had asked Aizawa to let him speak to her alone while he went to visit the other students. He was only a short distance away, but the walk seemed to last an eternity, with each footstep getting heavier. He hadn't spoken with Midoriya since the incident at Kamino Ward. He wanted to visit him in the hospital, but the last time he did that the results were less than ideal. He figured that he was the last person he would want to speak to anyway, and didn't want to awaken any unnecessary trauma from what had happened. The poor boy had suffered so much, and deep down, All Might blamed himself. He had to make this right somehow. Toshinori. All Might was pulled out of his thoughts at the sound of his name. He had made it to Midoriya's apartment complex, but he wasn't alone. Leaning against a shiny Rolls-Royce was Bruce, who had appeared to be waiting for him. "Bruce," said All Might, "what are you doing here?" "Midoriya is my student," said Bruce. "I am as much responsible for his abduction as you are. Come on." He gestured for All Might to follow him. "This isn't going to be easy." Bruce and All Might sat across the table from Izuku and Mrs. Midoriya. She had provided coffee and cake for them, was polite and courteous, but they both could feel the icy glare that came from her eyes. Bruce stood stoically as usual, but All Might felt like he was sinking in his seat. All Might cleared his throat awkwardly. "You probably already know why we're here," he said. "You received a notice that UA is moving our students to dormitories." "Yes, I saw it," she said simply. "Wayne Enterprises has seen to it that the dormitories are equipped with the highest security measures available," said Bruce. "And having the students on campus will allow UA to closely monitor who is coming and going from the school. The security measures utilize DNA mapping so that only those with matching signatures can access the campus, so I appreciate the lengths you have gone through," said Mrs. Midoriya. "But I have made up my mind. Izuku won't be returning to UA." Izuku gasped. All Might flinched slightly but wasn't surprised. Her boy had been kidnapped and UA was powerless to stop it. If he had a child, he would feel the same way. He looked over towards Bruce, but his expression was still passive, almost calculating. "Mom, you said yesterday," Izuku began. "I know what I said," Mrs. Midoriya replied. "But I've changed my mind." She looked directly into All Might's eyes. "Izuku had admired you for so long, ever since he was a child. And you," she turned to Bruce, "you believed in him and gave him the chance to fulfill his dreams. I know that he has worked so hard for this and has achieved so much, but..." She paused, quivering slightly. "When I received the call that he had been kidnapped, it felt like my world had come to an end. I saw him on TV, suddenly using a quirk and attacking All Might. That wasn't the sweet baby boy that I had raised. The police told me what they did to him." Tears began to flow freely from her eyes. "I won't let him go through that again. I can't go through that again." "I understand your trepidation," said Bruce. "With all due respect, Mr. Wayne," said Mrs. Midoriya, "I know about your reputation as a playboy. How could you possibly know what it's like to lose a child?" "Mom," said Izuku. "It's okay, Izuku," said Bruce. "Let her speak." "You also have Batman training my boy," continued Mrs. Midoriya. "I've seen on the news what they say about him. They say he's an unlicensed vigilante with a violent history. His path is paved with blood, as is yours," she added to All Might. "As a citizen, I am thankful for what you have done to save this city. But as a mother," she turned to Izuku, "I know you want to continue going to UA, but I can't take it anymore. He was kidnapped, tortured, and was given a quirk by force and brainwashed into fighting the heroes trying to save him. I don't understand how such a thing could have happened, and to my son. I don't have the nerves to trust my son to attend UA, not after everything that has happened." "It's not their fault, Mom," said Izuku. "They're your teachers, aren't they?" said Mrs. Midoriya. "Isn't it their job to keep you safe?" "But if it wasn't for Batman, I wouldn't be where I am today," Izuku said. "You're right," said Mrs. Midoriya. "You wouldn't be. And who knows where you'll be tomorrow? Dead, like his last sidekick." All Might and Izuku blanched in surprise. Bruce remained stone-faced. "They said that his last sidekick was killed by a villain," Mrs. Midoriya continued. "How can I possibly let you go back to that man and trust him to protect you when he couldn't protect him?" Silence stretched between them. "I may be acting like an overprotective parent," said Mrs. Midoriya, breaking the silence. "I don't want to steal my son's dreams away from him. There are other schools out there besides UA, and other people who can teach him besides Batman." Izuku looked helplessly at Bruce, who didn't break his gaze from Izuku's mother. He stood to his feet and sighed deeply. "I'd like you to come with us, Mrs. Midoriya, if you don't mind," he said. "There is something I would like to show you." Bruce, All Might, Izuku, and Mrs. Midoriya all drove in silence in Bruce's Rolls-Royce. He hadn't explained where they were going, or why he suddenly wanted to leave now. Izuku was scared. His dream of attending UA and becoming a hero seemed to be over just as it had begun. And ironically, after he had finally obtained a quirk, he wondered what Bruce was going to show them, but he had little hope it would change his mother's mind. They drove until they reached Wayne Tower, but they didn't drive to the parking structure. Instead, Bruce took them to the false wall, pressing on a small device to open it. "Bruce," said Izuku, "what are you doing?" "It's okay, Izuku," said Bruce. "Are you sure about this?" asked All Might. "She has a right to know," said Bruce. "What is going on?" said Mrs. Midoriya. "All will be explained soon, ma'am," said Bruce, driving through the opened wall. Izuku's mind was racing as they descended to the warehouse. What was Bruce planning? How was this going to help? He wanted to ask a million questions, but felt it was best to remain silent for now. The elevator stopped at the bottom level. Bruce stepped out and let the rest of them out of the car. Izuku's mother gasped in surprise as she took in her surroundings. "What is this?" she demanded. "Some sort of military bunker?" She stopped in shock as her eyes fell upon the batsuit in the storage container. Her eyes darted between Bruce and the batsuit, completely at a loss for words. They all turned as the door adjacent to them opened, Alfred walking through only to stop short at seeing Izuku's mother. "Alfred," she said. "Mrs. Midoriya," said Alfred, a slight look of surprise on his stoic face. He looked between her, Izuku, Bruce, and All Might for a few seconds before finally speaking. "Ah," he said awkwardly. "I see you have come across our little secret. I suppose there is no use in denying it." He bowed his head in mock shame. "I am the Batman." It was all Izuku could do to stifle a laugh. "It's okay, Alfred," said Bruce, smiling slightly. "Jolly good, sir," said Alfred. "I'll go get the kettle on." He disappeared back through the door, leaving the four of them alone. A few minutes later, they were all sitting around the table, Izuku's mom having composed herself. "You're telling me," Mrs. Midoriya said, "all this time, and those things I said." "It's okay, Mrs. Midoriya," said Bruce. "You said what you needed to say. And you are right to say those things," he added. "I wasn't able to save your son before they took him. I wasn't able to keep him safe. For that, I am sorry." "Master Bruce did not sleep for the entire time Master Izuku was taken," said Alfred, offering her a crumpet. "He spearheaded Izuku's search and rescue with the police." "I didn't know that," said Mrs. Midoriya. "There is one thing that you got wrong, I'm afraid, Mrs. Midoriya," said Bruce. He pulled out his wallet from his suit coat pocket, producing a small picture from within. Handing it over to his mother, Izuku recognized the boy in the picture immediately. "Robin, Jason, was more than just my sidekick," he said. "He was my son." Mrs. Midoriya looked up from the picture in shock, handing it back to him. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't know." "There's no way you could have known," said Bruce. "In many ways, your boy reminds me of him. But you should know then why I don't want him to go back," said Mrs. Midoriya. "Why I want to keep him out of danger." "I do understand," said Bruce. "Just as any good mother would want to." "Then what is going on here?" said Mrs. Midoriya. "What are we doing here?" Bruce leaned over and turned on the holographic projector on the table. "I wanted to show you this," he said. Izuku was surprised to see it was footage of his time training in the warehouse. "Your son has accomplished so much." When others had written him off as a lost cause, it was his determination to become a hero that allowed him to push past his limits. "I didn't recruit your son just to get him into UA High." The camera switched over to Izuku coming to Uraraka's aid when she was accosted on the street. Izuku was surprised that he had this footage. "Your son was already a hero before I met him," continued Bruce. "We live in a world where in order to be called a hero you have to hold some sort of special license. But in reality, anyone can be a hero." He turned off the projector and turned back to Mrs. Midoriya. "I don't believe that your son needs UA, me, or anyone else to be a hero. I think that he had what it takes to be a hero from the start. And I know that he is going to accomplish great things. No matter the school, no matter the teachers." "He's right," said All Might. Izuku jumped. He had almost forgotten he was here. All Might stood, suddenly entering into his muscle form, and knelt in front of Izuku and his mother, bowing his head till it touched the floor. "I owe you both an apology," he said. "I was one of those doubters who had written him off as hopeless. I, the person who he admired and believed in the most, did not share his belief in him." There was a small flash of smoke as he returned to his depowered form, but he stayed in his bowed position. "I was foolish not to see what Mr. Wayne had seen in him. Foolish and blind. But I see the truth now. I do not just believe that your son is already a hero, but I believe that he will one day surpass me as the #1 hero. I believe with all my heart that he will become a greater hero than I or Batman could ever be." "What are you saying?" said Mrs. Midoriya, shocked at his words. "What is this?" "I apologize for not believing in your son," said All Might. "I apologize for not being there to save him. I should have been giving him my all as his teacher, but was too foolish and stubborn to see his full potential. I'm sorry. I implore the both of you to forgive this past weakness." He finally rose from his bowed position, standing. "It is true that my and Bruce's path is filled with blood, but that is the exact reason I believe that young Midoriya should remain as his student. Together, we can show him how to find his own way, free of the mistakes that we have made in the past." "All Might," said Izuku softly. He had never seen this side of him before. "The heroes at UA know that things can't continue as they've been," continued All Might. "We are committed to keeping your son and all our students safe. I will protect your son, even if it costs me my life. As will I, said Bruce, standing next to All Might. Izuku felt tears well up in his eyes. He looked at his mother, who was wiping her own tears from her eyes. I don't hate any of you, said Mrs. Midoriya. I don't hate Yue either, but I want Izuku to be safe and happy. All Might, Mr. Wayne, Izuku needs you, all of you, to protect him, guide him and raise him in ways that I can't. But my heart will not take losing him again. If you can promise me that you can keep him safe, then he can return to Yue. You have my word, said Bruce. And mine, said All Might. Izuku, said Mrs. Midoriya. If you go back to Yue, you have to be so careful. I will, said Izuku. I won't make you worry. All Might, Mr. Wayne, and even you Alfred, said Mrs. Midoriya. Please take care of my boy. Gotham City, midnight. Please don't. Black Mask crawled along the floor of his office, the corpses of his men piled around him. His attacker stood over him, having killed every last one of them single-handedly. His attacker towered over him, his face obscured by a mask and hood, reloading 2 custom M1911 pistols. Black Mask was wounded, having taken several shots to the shoulder and abdomen from his attacker's pistols. Struggling, he got to his feet, holding his hands out in front of him, pleading. Please, you don't have to do this. He begged. I'll give you whatever you want. I'll go wherever you want. You'll never hear from me again, I promise. He stopped abruptly as he realized his back was against the large window. He whimpered as his attacker placed one of the pistols against his cracked skeletal mask. Please no, he said. I'll give you anything. Just tell me what you want. The man drew his gun back, holstering it, and leaned in close. I want you to go to hell. Rearing back, the attacker kicked Black Mask hard in the chest, sending him crashing out the window, falling 4 stories. With a sickening splat, Black Mask, one of Gotham's most notorious crime bosses, lay dead in the alley below. The attacker looked out the window, confirming his enemy's lifeless corpse. He walked over to the computer on his desk. Black Mask was just using it before the attack, and hadn't had time to lock it. He had little time to search it before the police arrived, so he had to act fast to obtain the information he needed. After a few minutes of perusing, he had found what he was looking for. Black Mask received millions of dollars from an offshore account owned by one Jack White. He had seen that name enough times to know exactly what it meant. It was one of the Joker's oldest aliases. He'd found him. The Joker had recently gone into hiding and hadn't been seen by the people of Gotham since his escape from Arkham 6 months ago. It was rumored that he was responsible for a heist with the Bank of Gotham 3 months ago, but nothing was conclusive. Due to the amount of money he was funneling into Black Mask's account, it was obvious this was the case. Black Mask was receiving funds from the clown in exchange for muscle, weapons, and stolen technology, but the reasons were still unclear to the man. However, he had a lead on how to find the clown, and now he had complete access to Black Mask's files and funds. He was downloading the information to an external hard disk and began transferring his funds to his own private account when something caught his attention, a file labeled Operation Playtime. Curious, he opened the file to see several images and documents in reference to Batman, but something else that piqued his interest. Many of the images were of a young boy, no older than 15. He recognized him as the young boy who had in Japan who had taken down the hero killer. He was the quirkless boy who was attending UA High School, Izukumidoriya. There had been many rumors as of late across the criminal underworld that Batman had taken on a new protege. It appears the rumors were founded. As the man sifted through the files, he felt a feeling of anger begin to well up inside him. 3 years after the death of his last sidekick, the Bat had already moved on to another. He supposed this shouldn't come as a surprise to him. The Bat seemed to move through partners quickly. Still, it was bothersome to the man to move on so quickly after the death of someone so close to him. But was anyone really close to the Batman? His thoughts were interrupted as he came across another image of the student, an image taken from the UA Sports Festival. This image, however, had a grotesque green smiley face painted over it. He was able to make out the words that were written beneath it. You know what happens when you bring others into this game of ours. The files finished copying, and the man shut the laptop. He began to douse the office in gasoline, using a Molotov cocktail to light the room ablaze. Having made it safely outside the building, he mounted his motorcycle and made his exit. His mind was racing as he sped off towards the direction of his hideout in the Narrows. Everyone seemed to know or suspect that Izukumidoriya was Batman's new sidekick. And now it seems the clown knew about Batman's new sidekick as well. And now the boy was his next target. He had to find out what Operation Playtime was. It was a little over a week left before the end of summer break and the start of a new semester at UA High. Izuku had recovered fully from his injuries at the hospital and was at home, but not for long. He had finished packing his luggage and would soon be boarding a plane for America. He was going to spend the next week in Gotham City. It had taken some persuasion, but Bruce had convinced her that, considering all that had transpired the past couple of weeks, it would be good for Izuku to take some time away to recuperate, and had offered to take him to his ancestral home outside of Gotham. The biggest reason for this trip, however, was because of Izuku's new quirk. He had still not gotten used to having Kaken's quirk. Despite his knowledge about its use and his aptitude with explosions, he often found himself accidentally activating it and causing explosions inside the house. More than once the landlord was called, and they had to come up with creative explanations to cover for them. Bruce explained that he knew some of the best doctors and specialists in the world, and wanted to bring Izuku to them for examination. Izuku understood his reasoning, but was starting to feel rather annoyed at all this attention. He felt like a lab rat in a science experiment, and often found himself pining for the days where he didn't have a quirk, a time where he felt like he knew who he was and things made sense. It was ironic, considering how many times Izuku wished for a quirk like Kaken's when he was a child. Izuku. He heard his mom calling for him. Alfred is almost here. Are you all packed? Yes, Mom, said Izuku, carrying his bag to the living room. Are you sure you want to go? His mom asked, worried. We can still cancel if you want. It's fine, Mom, said Izuku. I'll be fine, I promise. Bruce will be with me. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, his mom replied. Just promise me no heroic stuff, okay? You're going there to get away from that. Hey, said Izuku, hugging her. I promise, no heroic stuff. He pulled away as he heard a knock at the door. His mother opened it to reveal Alfred standing there, smiling. Good morning, Master Midoriya, Mrs. Midoriya, he said, bowing. Are you ready to depart? Yes, said Izuku, hugging his mom one more time. Be safe, she said, wiping tears away. I will, Mom, Izuku said. You have my word, Mrs. Midoriya, said Alfred. Izuku will be returned to you safely. I'll hold you to that, Alfred, his mom said as they departed. As they drove away from Izuku's apartment, he couldn't help but feel a funny feeling of foreboding strike him. He tried to shake it off. It was probably just his nerves. He still wasn't sleeping well at night, still plagued by the various nightmares that haunted him. Hopefully, wherever these doctors that Bruce was talking about were, they were at least able to help him with his nightmares. Is something amiss, Master Midoriya? Said Alfred. I'm fine, Izuku lied. I am not the world's greatest detective, but I do know when I am being lied to, Alfred said. Izuku sighed. Todoroki, my friend, said that I need to make this power my own, he said. But I'm not sure I know how to. It feels like I'm pretending. How so, Master Midoriya? Asked Alfred. Kaken was amazing, said Izuku. He was so good at everything he ever did. I had no doubts that he could have been a hero, and a great one if he hadn't. The words caught in his throat. He still had a hard time admitting to himself that Kaken was dead, despite having brought his killer to justice. But I don't know if I could ever be like him, as strong as him. I don't know if I could ever be worthy enough for this quirk. I understand, said Alfred. This is quite the responsibility that has been put on your shoulders, how to honor your fallen friend, but to adopt this new power as your own. It certainly is not an easy matter, but I believe that by the end of this trip, you will have a better understanding of the matter and yourself. I hope so, said Izuku. He leaned against the leather armrest of his seat and looked out the window. It was beginning to rain, and the water obscured his vision slightly. It was several minutes before he realized that they were not driving towards the airport at all. They had driven out of the city and were now surrounded by rice paddies and farmland. Alfred, where are we? Said Izuku. Aren't we going to the airport? Dreadfully sorry, Master Midoriya, Alfred replied. We didn't want your mother to worry, but Master Bruce has arranged an alternative means of transportation, which should be commencing right. Alfred checked his watch. Now, a bright light began to shine directly on Izuku, enveloping him in a bright blaze. Suddenly, Alfred and the Rolls-Royce he was riding in faded away, replaced instead by a very large room he did not recognize. He was surrounded by computers and various machinery, standing on a large pad with a mechanical device that reminded him of a large shower head placed over him. There were several people in strange uniforms at the computers that he didn't recognize. Teleport complete, one of them announced. Passenger has arrived. Izuku realized that he was sitting down on the pad and tried to stand, but felt a wave of nausea come over him. He doubled over, trying to prevent himself from throwing up. Easy, said a voice beside him. The transporter takes some getting used to. Izuku stood to see Batman standing over him, helping him up. Standing next to him on one side was a tall man wearing a skin-tight blue suit with flowing red cape, and a woman in battle armor, a large sword and glowing rope strapped to her belt, and a shield attached to her back. It took Izuku a minute before realizing that he had seen these two before. He gasped audibly, his heart racing as he pieced together who was standing before him and where he was just transported to. "This is he stammered, trying to form the words. "Welcome to the Watchtower, Izuku," said the man, shaking Izuku's trembling hand. "We've been looking forward to finally meeting you," said the woman, smiling. "Batman has told us a lot about you." Izuku still could scarcely believe it. He was in the Watchtower, standing in the presence of arguably the greatest heroes known to man. Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, the core members of the Justice League. All angst and trepidation seemed to melt away from him in this very moment, replaced only with giddy excitement. This was the greatest day of Izuku's life. Gotham City 3 days ago. Commissioner James Gordon stood on the rooftop of the GCPD building, just as he had done countless nights before, lighting the beacon that called his longtime friend and ally. Gordon's support of Batman had ruffled quite a few feathers in the pro-hero and law enforcement communities over the years. He wasn't surprised. Long before he was appointed commissioner, corruption had spread through Gotham like a malignant tumor. Many cops, judges, and even pro-heroes were taking kickbacks from their mob contacts, such as Carmine Falcone and Sam Maroney, two of Gotham's most notorious criminal kingpins. They were able to pick and choose who was punished for what crime, usually competitors in their business affairs, and many cops and pro-heroes were making bank moonlighting as enforcers. You didn't know who you could trust in this town. It wasn't until the Batman appeared that things really started to change. Gordon didn't trust him at first. He performed hero work without a license, operating outside the checks and balances of the system, operating outside the law, a law he had sworn to uphold. But on Christmas Eve, around 20 years ago, the Joker, posing as Black Mask at the time, offered a $50 million bounty on Batman's head. Gordon witnessed supercriminals, cops, and even pro-heroes join in the crusade against Batman in an attempt to claim the bounty, but he stopped them all without killing any of them. It was during this incident that he had gotten to meet Batman face to face for the first time. Despite his feelings towards Batman as a vigilante and criminal, upon their meeting him, something triggered from inside him that he couldn't ignore: his quirk. For as long as Gordon could remember, he had a particular power of his own that later was identified to be his quirk, a superior gut instinct. It allowed him to have a sort of sixth sense about individuals around him. By simply looking at them, he was able to determine if they were honest with him, lying to him, hiding something, trustworthy or untrustworthy. It had served him well as a police officer, but in a city like Gotham, surrounded by dirty cops and heroes, he had almost forgotten what it felt like to get a positive reading off someone. The last person he expected it to be was Batman. "Been waiting long, Jim," said a voice from behind him. Gordon turned to see Batman appear from the shadows. As usual, he wasn't able to hear him or see him coming. "Hardly," he replied, shaking Batman's hand. "I saw you on TV fighting off that crazy villain with all might. Is that where you've been all this time?" "Among other places," said Batman. "Well, while you've been off on vacation, we just had an incident that you might be interested in hearing," said Gordon, handing Batman a manila envelope. "Black Mask is dead." Batman did not visibly react to the news, instead searching through the case file silently. "He was found lying on the pavement several stories below his office window," continued Gordon. "We got a positive ID on the body matching to Roman Siona's. It's definitely him." "What did you pull from the crime scene?" said Batman, not looking up from the folder. "Not much in terms of physical evidence," said Gordon. "Whoever did this tried to cover their tracks and lit the building on fire. It took emergency services 2 hours to put it out. We managed to recover this. I figured if anyone could get something off it, you could." He pulled out a badly damaged laptop computer encased in a plastic evidence bag, charred and burnt from the fire. "We did manage to catch an image of the perp when we pulled the security feed." Gordon produced a smartphone from his coat pocket and played the video for Batman. The image was only a few frames, but he could clearly see Siona's men being gunned down before the assailant jumped into view. He was wielding what looked to be 2 customized M1911 pistols. His movements suggested some sort of military or advanced combat training. His most distinguishing features were a brown leather jacket and chromed bright red helmet obscuring his face. "We don't have a positive ID yet," said Gordon, looking down to put his phone away again. "But When Gordon looked up again, Batman was gone. "Every damn time," Gordon said, switching off the bat signal in a huff. Izuku was completely overwhelmed by the sights around him. The Watchtower was more than he could have ever hoped for. Hovering in orbit around the Earth, it served as a home base for some of the greatest heroes known to man. As a space station, it was poised to respond to emergencies anywhere in the world, equipped with the most advanced technological, medical, and scientific resources known to man. Izuku accompanied Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman as they took him on a personal tour of the Watchtower, starting with the transporter room from which he had just arrived. Superman explained that the teleporters allowed them to transport anywhere they needed to as if they were simply walking through a window. They then proceeded to the hangar bay, where Izuku was amazed to see several jets, rockets, and spacecraft the likes of which he had never seen before. They continued with their tour, visiting several laboratories that worked on all kinds of medical, technical, and scientific research. Batman explained that it was here that many of the greatest scientific advances and discoveries began. They then proceeded towards the training areas, equipped with the latest state-of-the-art combat, environmental, and rescue training simulations that would rival Batman's. Izuku had never seen so many pro heroes in one place before. They continued their journey out of the training area, taking him down a hallway lined with several doors. "How are you liking your tour, Izuku?" said Superman. "I've never seen anything like it," said Izuku happily. "I can't believe I'm actually here on the Watchtower." Izuku's smile faded. "But I don't understand, why am I here? I thought I was going to Gotham." "We'll be going there soon," said Batman. "But there's someone I want you to meet first." Batman stopped in front of one of the doors, waving a keycard to open it. He stepped aside, waiting for Izuku to step through the door. Suddenly nervous, Izuku tentatively stepped through the door, but stopped dead in his tracks as his eyes fell upon the individual waiting for them in the room. He was tall, powerfully built and humanoid in form, but with thick, green skin stretched tightly over his muscular frame. His eyes had no irises, glowing with a violent red hue. He wore a black jumpsuit, a red X stretching across his chest, billowing black cape flowing behind him. Izuku couldn't help but stare, at a complete loss for words. "Izuku, this is Jayons," said Wonder Woman. You're..." Izuku struggled to collect his words. "You're the Martian Manhunter," he said finally. Izuku could hardly believe he was meeting a real, live Martian. Since Superman's appearance, it had become a general consensus that there was indeed life on other planets. But it was the appearance of the Martian Manhunter that really drove this point home for the people of Earth with the knowledge of extraterrestrials living so close to us in our own solar system. "It's a pleasure to meet you, izukumidoriya," said the Martian Manhunter. "You'll draw flies leaving your mouth open like that," said Superman, chuckling. "Oh, I'm sorry," said Izuku hastily. "It's just, I've never met a Martian before." "There is no need to be nervous," said the Martian Manhunter, smiling. "I don't bite. And please, call me Jayon." "I don't understand," said Izuku, looking around at the heroes around him. "What's this all about?" "Batman has told me that you have been having nightmares," said Jayon. "What?" said Izuku. "No, I'm fine." Izuku didn't have to be psychic to tell that Jayon was not convinced. "It is not a sign of weakness to ask for help, Izuku," said Jayon. "A lesson I wish your mentor would learn," said Superman, nudging Batman gently, who grunted but did not react. "You brought me here just because of that?" asked Izuku. "They're just nightmares." "We don't believe they are," said Jayon. "What do you mean?" said Izuku. "We don't know what All For One did to you during your time with him, other than give you a quirk," said Batman. "But it is not too far-fetched to believe that he used some sort of brainwashing on you, similar to what he did with the Namu. You've already demonstrated considerable ability fighting off brainwashing," said Wonder Woman. "But if we don't take care of this now, it's possible it will get worse." Are you saying I could become like them?" said Izuku. "Like the Namu?" "It won't come to that," said Superman immediately. "We don't mean to frighten you, Izuku," said Wonder Woman. "That is why Jayon is here. We are going to take a journey into your mind," said Jayon, "to find and destroy any remnants of All For One's grasp on you." Izuku paused, looking from one hero to the next, finally resting on Batman. His face remained stoic, but Izuku could almost feel the confidence radiating off him, pouring into his own heart. Though not a word was spoken between them, the message rang loud and true for Izuku. "You will be safe." "All right," said Izuku. "What do I do?" "Just relax," said Jayon. "Journeying into your mind will feel strange at first, but it is important you don't fight it. Do not worry, I will guide you every step of the way." When Izuku closed his eyes, he felt as if someone had stuck a probe into his mind. It wasn't painful, but it definitely felt foreign, almost like an itch you couldn't scratch. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes to find that he was standing in a familiar hallway, looking to his right to see a door with the words "Wanna" etched in them. Somehow, he was back at UA High. "What?" said Izuku, shocked. When did I?" "Don't be alarmed," said a voice behind him. Izuku spun to see Jayon standing over him. The meld was successful. We have entered into your subconscious. It looks like UA, said Izuku. I have constructed it into a familiar setting for you, replied Jaeon. This will help your mind relax enough for us to delve deeper into your psyche. What are behind these doors? Said Izuku. Each door represents a different part of your mind, said Jaeon. Some of them contain memories, some contain hopes and fears, and others. He paused, walking towards the Class 1 room. Is what we are here to find out. Opening the door, Izuku was besieged by a feeling of extreme nostalgia. Walking into the room, he quickly realized that it wasn't his homeroom at all. Instead, they appeared to be in an elementary school classroom, with several children and a few adults were gathered around one small child in the middle of the room. Izuku took a step back in surprise, steadying himself. Kaken, he whispered. It was all coming back to him now. This was the day Kaken got his quirk. Small sparks crackled and burst from the young Kaken's hands while all the other children, including a young Izuku, stared in awe and amazement. You're so lucky, said one of the kids. Impressive, said one of the teachers. I bet that's going to grow into an amazing quirk. Definitely, said another teacher. A flashy quirk for a future hero, it's perfect. Izuku looked at his own hand. It was a perfect quirk for a perfect hero. He felt tears welling up in his eyes as he continued to watch the scene before him. This is the boy you inherited your quirk from, said Jaeon, more of a statement than a question. Kaken, said Izuku. It belonged to him. It still belongs to him. This quirk could not have found a better holder than in the hands of a friend like you, said Jaeon. We weren't friends, said Izuku. At least, he didn't want to be. You looked up to this boy, said Jaeon, again, not as a question. He was amazing, said Izuku. He was the best at everything he did. There was nothing he couldn't do. He was the closest thing to All Might as I could get. Izuku choked, the memory of All Might and the events at Kamino Ward sending a pang into his chest. The room around them began to fade, and they somehow had made it back into the hallway, the door closing behind them. Jaeon said nothing, walking towards another room. This time, Izuku found himself inside a hospital room. He saw himself and his mother consulting with a doctor, who was slouched carelessly in his chair as he spoke to them. Sorry kid, it's not gonna happen, he said callously. Izuku should have already manifested either your husband or your quirks or even a combination of these quirks. He continued to his mother, but after reviewing his x-rays, I don't think he's going to. He continued to explain how research on quirks have discovered a link to the pinky toe, and a likelihood of developing a quirk. Since Izuku had 2 joints instead of 1 on his pinky toe, this put him in the percentile of about 20% of the population who did not develop quirks. Izuku stared at his younger self, feeling the almost palpable pain of seeing his dreams crushed. He turned away, unable to witness it anymore. At the time, he had no idea the years of angst and prejudice he would endure for a genetic condition he never wanted. He felt a pair of hands on his shoulders, steadying him and calming him. I too know what it is like to be different from everyone around you, said Jaeon. It can be isolating and lonely. He lifted Izuku's head to look at him. But it has also made you stronger. He walked past Izuku back into the hallway, who followed him in suit. They made their way further down the hallway towards another door. As Jaeon opened the door, Izuku was transported back to another familiar setting, one he would have rather left forgotten. He was back on the rooftop, staring at his junior high school self and the sickly form of All Might sitting across from him. Izuku felt a feeling of fear well within him, recalling the conversation that came next. Pro-heroes are always risking their lives, said All Might. Some villains can't be beaten without powers. So can you be a hero, not without a quirk? Izuku felt the same twist in his stomach he felt all that time ago as he watched his former self drop to his knees, All Might leaving him alone to wallow in his crushed dreams. Izuku hunched over, clutching his chest, the world around him seeming to tremble and shake. He once again felt that strong, firm hand on his shoulder, and a feeling of warmth spread through him, quickly evaporating his previous feelings. This must be painful to watch, said Jaeon, pulling him upright. I am sorry. Why are we doing this? Said Izuku, wiping away tears from his eyes. I believe it to be necessary, said Jaeon. All for One used your feelings for your friend, the fact that you were born without a quirk, and your animosity towards All Might to gain a foothold into your mind. This is where I believe that his control had begun. And I believe that it will lead us there. Quickly, he said, taking flight and hovering towards the door on the rooftop that All Might passed through. Where are we going? Said Izuku, following suit. All Might is the key, said Jaeon. I believe he will lead us where we need to go. Izuku followed Jaeon through the rooftop door and down the flight of stairs. The stairs seemed to go on forever, and All Might seemed to have disappeared in their descent. As they continued, Izuku felt himself growing more and more anxious. The walls and stairs seemed to twist and turn in odd directions. More than once Izuku felt as if he was walking upside down. The stairway grew darker, more foreboding, the sun from the rooftop having left them far behind. He wanted to return to the surface, to leave this darkened hellscape and never return. But he pushed past his fears, following Jaeon downward further. "We are here, Izuku," said Jaeon, coming to an abrupt stop as the staircase ended. The way before them was dark, frightening Izuku to his very core. They entered into a hallway, this time without doors or windows lining the halls, only a solitary door at the far end of the hallway, illuminated by a blood-red demonic light hanging above it. Terrifying sounds of scraping and clawing came from the door, shaking Izuku to his core. "What is this place?" said Izuku. "This is your ID," said Jaeon, "where all your instinctive, unconscious and primal urges are housed in your mind." "Why does it look like this?" asked Izuku. "Because this is where the final remnant of All For One's grasp on you remains," said Jaeon. We have to go in there," said Izuku, frightened. The comforting feeling returned as Jaeon put his hand back on Izuku's shoulder. "It is the only way," said Jaeon, "and I will be beside you every step of the way." Izuku looked up at Jaeon and back at the door. He knew whatever was behind there he wanted nothing to do with. He was more frightened than he had ever been in his life. He wanted to run away, far away to the safety of the Watchtower. But he knew the nightmares would only be waiting for him, and this tiny door would not hold back his demons forever. "All right," said Izuku, steeling himself. "Let's go." Internal struggle. With trembling fingers, Izuku slowly opened the door that led to the deepest recesses of his mind. The corridor behind it was pitch black, leaving Izuku to determine from there what lay in wait for him on the other side. This was not at all what he thought he was getting into when he started his hero career. Supervillains and criminals were one thing, but this was on a new level entirely. Shooting a nervous glance at Jaeon, who simply nodded, Izuku steeled himself and walked through the door. The hallway seemed to go on for eternity. He could hear sounds of cries and screeches that came from all around him. He tried to push his fear aside, but it continued to creep into his heart. Izuku turned to look at Jaeon following behind him. He was glad that he was with him. He didn't know what he would do if Jaeon was gone. "Jaeon," said Izuku into the darkness. No reply. Jaeon. Again, no reply. Only darkness. Izuku began to feel panic enter into his heart. He began to run down the hallway, calling for Jaeon as he ran. He had to get out of there. He had to wake up, but there was no way out. He was trapped. He felt his feet slip from under him, falling hard to the floor. He lay there, for how long he did not know, tears streaming down his face. "Don't leave me," he cried. "Jaeon, Bruce, All Might, please help me." "Oh, Izuku," said a voice from above him. "You're not alone." Izuku raised his head, ready to cry out for joy that Jaeon was back. But it wasn't Jaeon that stood before him. He let out a gasp of fright as the figure emerged from the shadows, showing himself at full form. He would recognize the scarred, faceless visage that appeared before him anywhere, the very man who haunted his dreams. "All for one. I never left, Izuku," he said, his mouth twisting into a perverse smile, his hand reaching forward and grabbing Izuku by the throat. "And I will always be here, right beside you." All for One lifted Izuku high by his throat, completely off his feet. He struggled to free himself against his captor, but it was futile. He had no weapons, he couldn't use his quirk, he couldn't even scream. He was powerless. Batman stared silently at Jaeon and Izuku in their collective trance. It had been only 5 minutes since they had started, but already Bruce was feeling concern. He knew the boy was strong, but he was still young. Most adults weren't prepared to handle the sheer psychological trauma he had experienced. He was thankful Jaeon was there to guide him through the process. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Izuku and Jaeon doubled over as if experiencing some sort of synchronized pain. Izuku suddenly began to convulse into a seizure-like episode, falling out of his chair and onto the floor where he continued his convulsions. "Midoriya," shouted Batman, rushing to his side. "What's happening?" said Superman, alarmed. "It's All For One." Batman turned to the source of the voice. Jaeon had come out of his trance, but Izuku continued to thrash about on the floor. "What's going on, Jaeon?" he said sharply. "All For One's hold on Izuku is stronger than we anticipated," said Jaeon. "It's fighting back." "What do you mean?" said Wonder Woman. "We had just entered his ID when something had taken hold of me and expelled me from his mind," said Jaeon. They began to carry Izuku to the medical wing down the hall, placing him on a stretcher. The medics began their work, trying to quell the seizure and stabilize Izuku, but Batman didn't know how much good it would do. "You have to get back in there," said Batman. "You have to help him." "I tried," said Jaeon, "but it is blocking my attempts to enter his mind again." I believe All For One may have had a quirk that gave him some sort of psychic ability. Considering how he has amplified his other quirks, it wouldn't surprise me if he did so with this one. There has to be another way, said Superman. Jaeon pondered for a moment. All For One is feeding off of his negative memories to give strength to the brainwashing, he said, and most of them center around All Might. All Might, that's it, said Batman suddenly, snapping his fingers. All For One used Izuku's anger towards All Might to gain a foothold for his mental conditioning. He brought his hand to his chin and thought, I think I know of a way to fix this, but I'm going to need some help. All Might stretched as he stepped out of the bathtub, placing a towel around his waist. His wounds from the Camino incident had healed nicely thanks to Recovery Girl, but a lingering ache still plagued him, and was usually only soothed by a hot bath. Now, he was looking forward to having some tea, kicking back and relaxing while watching. The world turned blue around him as his comfortable living room disappeared. Instead of the tatami mats he was used to feeling beneath his feet, it was a cold, hard floor. The smell of tea was replaced by the cold, sterile odor of the computers and heavy machinery around him. He only had a minute to survey his surroundings when he spotted the familiar bat-like personage before him. Good, you made it, said Batman. All Might paused for a moment and seemed to have a silent fit in front of him, gesturing widely in anger before finally speaking. What the hell is wrong with you, Bruce? Said All Might indignantly. You couldn't have warned me or waited until I was dressed. Come with me. Now, said Batman, turning and walking away. Wait, said All Might, falling in line behind him. It was not noticeable to the untrained ear, but his voice carried a worried tone to it. Something was wrong. It took him a moment for him to realize where he was. What are we doing on the Watchtower? What's going on? It's Midoriya, said Batman. What happened? No time. Hurry, said Batman. He brought All Might to one of the rooms in the medical wing, where All Might paused with surprise and embarrassment to see Superman and Wonder Woman waiting for them. Tashinori, said Superman, walking up to him and wringing his hand. It's great to see you again. Hello, Tashinori, said Wonder Woman. Clark, Diana, he said. It's good to see you again. He looked down, though I wish I wasn't feeling so underdressed. His eyes fell on the green Martian that sat in the chair next to him. Jaeon, it's great to see. He paused as he approached, gazing upon the unconscious Midoriya on the stretcher. What happened? Said All Might. Who did this to him? It would take too long to explain, said Batman, lying down on the stretcher next to Midoriya. He gestured for All Might to follow, who complied, bemused, lying down on his own stretcher next to Batman. Now, Jaeon, Batman said to the Manhunter. What do you mean now? Said All Might. What is going? Before he could finish, his head hit the pillow with a soft thump, and both he and Batman drifted into unconsciousness. Izuku struggled violently against the heavy chains that bound him. All For One had moved him to a room that burned a violent red hue, suspending him with chains over a deep, gaping hole that seemed to go on for eternity. He tried to use his quirk, but nothing worked. He tried to break free of the bonds, but they were too strong. Meanwhile, All For One stood before him, hovering over the hole, gloating. Don't fight the restraints, Izuku, he said. It will only make things more difficult. How are you here? Said Izuku. You should be in jail. I am, said All For One. I'm not really here, per se. Think of me as an echo left behind from our time together. What do you want with me? Said Izuku. I gave you a gift, Izuku, said All For One. Great power to achieve dreams beyond your imagination. Yet you threw it in my face, denying your destiny of destroying All Might and finally surpassing him. I control my own destiny, said Izuku. Perhaps you did, but not anymore, said All For One. What do you mean? Said Izuku. You will remain here from now on, said All For One, and I will be taking control of this vessel. You can't, said Izuku, horrified. But I can, said All For One. The quirk that was used to control your mind has a delightful little failsafe should the host take back control. I was hiding in your subconscious, growing in strength until the time was right to take control. Unfortunately, Batman was concerned about this and has forced me to act sooner than I would have liked. I will take command of this body and use it to rejoin Tamura in his fight against the heroes. You will be a great asset to his cause. I won't let you, said Izuku. You don't have a choice, he said, gesturing to the pit below him. What you see beneath you is your deep subconscious. Think of it as a place of forgetting. Nothing that enters ever escapes. Should you try to resist, I will have no choice but to send you there, where you will wander in endless darkness for the rest of your days. But I would much rather you stay here with me, and keep me company. His grotesque features contorted into a twisted smile. We will have so much fun together, just you and Detroit. Smash. A large figure emerged from nowhere, a heavy fist connecting with All For One's face, interrupting his monologue and sending him flying in the other direction. Izuku could hardly believe his eyes as he saw the giant, powerful form of his former hero standing before him, no longer sickly and frail, but strong and in his prime. All Might, said Izuku incredulously. Is that really you? Yes, young Midoriya, said All Might. No, we are here. Coming out of the shadows behind him came Jaeon and Batman, following in tow. All for One recovered and flew back from the shadows, and All Might quickly engaged him again while Batman and Jaeon set to work on freeing Izuku. No matter how far you're beaten back, you manage to slither out from even the smallest of crevices, said All Might. You won't beat me in here, said All for One, suddenly beginning to change. He began to grow in size and appearance, transforming into a gigantic dragon-like beast, batting All Might away like a fly. His mind is mine. Batman, help All Might, said Jaeon. I will help Midoriya. Batman nodded and left to engage the dragon with All Might. Jaeon began to use his immense strength to pull at the chains, but they held true. Jaeon, said Izuku. I'm sorry, I couldn't stop him. It's not your fault, Izuku. We underestimated him, said Jaeon, struggling to break the chains. These psychic bonds are strong. I will need your help. How can I help? Said Izuku. They won't budge. All for One wants you to think that he has taken control, said Jaeon. That is how he has trapped you. But this is still your mind. You can break free. How? You have to remain calm, said Jaeon. He planned to distract you to prevent you from concentrating. Focus on breaking free from the chains. Izuku nodded, trying to concentrate. The battle raged around them as All Might and Batman fought against All for One. He continued to change forms against the duo. Izuku still couldn't believe that All Might was back in full form, and that Batman could use his weapons against their enemy. But when he looked at Jaeon's glowing red eyes, he could see that he was using his powers to make their abilities tangible. It fascinated him. Izuku, you have to focus, said Jaeon, reading his mind. Right, sorry, said Izuku. He closed his eyes and began concentrating, all the while pulling at the chains that bound him. One by one, they began to break under the combined effort of Jaeon and Izuku. No, shouted One for All, using a powerful attack to throw Batman and All Might back. He lifted his hands and caused the ends of the chains to snap from their moorings and wrap themselves tightly around Izuku. A large tendril grew from All for One's hand and latched onto Jaeon and was thrown towards All Might and Batman. Before their eyes, Izuku fell deep into the pit below, disappearing into the darkness. Izuku, shouted Batman, running towards the pit. Jaeon took off in flight towards the pit, but both were stopped again by another blast from their enemy. All for One began to laugh mercilessly, but stopped abruptly as the ground beneath them began to shake. A large explosion came from the pit, rising out of the depths and blasting high into the air. All Might stared in amazement as his eyes moved to the top of the blast. Midoriya, his chains gone, and being carried by the arm by Kaken, said Izuku, shocked. He had felt something grab him as he fell into the pit, and was thrust upward at incredible speed. He opened his eyes and could hardly believe what he saw, Katsuki Bakugou, as he remembered him, carrying him upwards out of the pit in a massive explosion. Don't you let go, you damn nerd, he shouted. Repositioning himself in the air, he threw Izuku with incredible speed towards the shell-shocked All for One. As Izuku flew towards his enemy, Kaken matched his speed with him. You have my quirk, now stop being so fucking useless and kill that bastard. Izuku felt a fire light inside his heart that he had never felt before, a confidence and happiness that he never thought he could feel. All for One seemed to grow weaker as they approached. In perfect synchronization, the two boys threw their hands forward towards the helpless All for One, shouting in unison, howitzer impact. A massive explosion radiated from the two boys that rocked the foundation of Izuku's mind. All for One yelled in pain as he began to melt under the sheer intensity of the blast. This can't be, he shouted. I am invincible. Finally, the last remnant of All for One disappeared in a wisp. Immediately, the dark, foreboding atmosphere changed. No longer was it a prison, but a vast open field bathed in a warming light. All Might, Batman and Jaeon joined and stood next to the two boys. Batman looked to Jaeon, who scanned the area. All for One is gone, he confirmed. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief, immediately remembering who was standing next to him. Kaken, he said, turning to his friend. I'm so happy, but how are you here? How are you? Shut up and listen, you stupid nerd. Kaken snapped. He pointed his finger warningly into Izuku's face. You have my quirk now, idiot. I have a reputation to uphold, so don't you dare fucking lose again. Do you hear me? Izuku paused, trying hard not to laugh despite Kaken's angry words. It was just as he remembered him. I won't, said Izuku. You can count on that. Izuku jumped as Bakugou seemed to explode into a flash of light and mist. It began to swirl around Izuku, finally circling and disappearing into his chest. Izuku felt the warmth and confidence return as he turned back to Batman, and the others, wiping tears from his eyes. "He saved me," said Izuku. "But how could he be here? Was he even real?" "In a way," said Jaeon. "He is more or less a memory of the person he once was, attached to the quirk that you now carry." "That means you're fighting for more than just yourself," said Batman, "and are never truly fighting alone." "It's time we left," said Jaeon. In a moment, the entire world seemed to fade around them, and Izuku woke from a hospital bed in the Watchtower. Jaeon, Superman and Diana were standing over him, while Batman and All Might sat up from two stretchers next to him. "You worried us for a moment there, son," said Superman. "You pulled through, like a true warrior," said Wonder Woman, approvingly. "I wouldn't have made it if it hadn't been for all of you," said Izuku. Kaken, Jaeon, Bruce, and... He paused as he saw the sickly All Might shuffle awkwardly towards him. "All Might, young Midoriya," said All Might. "I'm glad you're safe. You had us worried. You had me worried." Izuku pondered All Might for a minute. After all that had happened between them, all the hate and anger he felt for him seemed to have for the hero had melted away. Izuku walked over to the hero and held out his hand, who took it and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, All Might," said Izuku. He looked him up and down. "Why are you in a towel?" Abandoned Siona's warehouse. Gotham Bay. 1 a.m. A heavy storm had raged on for hours, giant waves crashing against the walls of the warehouse. A man sat alone at a small desk. The only source of illumination was a small laptop in front of him. Next to the laptop sat a red helmet, which the man had just removed before sitting down to his work. He had been in Gotham for only a few weeks now, having been gone for 3 years. His time away felt like little more than a dream, wandering in a haze of pain and confusion. In the short amount of time that he had returned, news of his handiwork with Black Mask had spread throughout the criminal underworld and the local media. A newspaper was sprawled out on the table next to him, the headline reading "Red Hood Kills Black Mask." How fitting, he thought bitterly to himself. Normally, the death of a major player like Black Mask would leave a power vacuum that other criminals would be killing themselves over. However, no one dare step forward to claim Siona's territory. The Red Hood had sent a wave of fear among the various criminal empires, one that Batman could never duplicate, a fear of death. Batman had failed to rid this city of its monsters, especially its biggest one. But the Red Hood would not fail. The Red Hood continued his investigation through Black Mask's files. They were his only lead to the whereabouts of the Joker. He coupled these findings with others that he had discovered in different cities across the US. The Joker had completely disappeared from Gotham, and many had assumed that he was dead. But from what he could gather, the Joker was alive and well, and was using the weapons he purchased from Siona's to rob banks across the eastern United States. He was also purchasing technology that Siona's had stolen from various illicit sources. The technology in question was all considered by the criminal database to be highly illegal in nature, mostly used in dangerous experiments on quirks. But instead of sending it directly to the Joker, Siona's was sending them to a third party, one David Shield from My Island. The name immediately struck a chord with the Red Hood. David Shield was one of the most well-known names in hero support technology in the world, contracting with several support companies across the world, including Wayne Tech and Queen Consolidated, to produce many of the technologies and support items used by heroes everywhere, including the Justice League. He even personally designed each era of hero costume for the symbol of peace, All Might. This provoked so many questions in the Red Hood's mind. Why would S.H.I.E.L.D. be working with the Joker? And why would the Joker be supplying him with stolen technology? Perhaps he would be able to ask him personally. According to the local news, he and his daughter were coming to Gotham for a gala in his honor. This was his chance to get some answers, and perhaps finally find out where the Joker was hiding. Izuku sat his empty suitcase on a large 4-poster bed. He had just finished unpacking, having arrived at Wayne Manor with Bruce and All Might. Izuku thought it was strange that Bruce had invited him along. Apparently, so did All Might, who tried to decline, but Bruce was insistent. Alfred was already waiting for them upon arriving and had prepared rooms for each of them. The room around him was sparsely decorated and looked as if it hadn't been used in a number of years, but was still tidy and well kept. Izuku sat on the bed, lost in thought. The events at the Watchtower had filled him with a new lease on life, but also had left him with a plethora of questions. Most of all, how Kaken had come to his rescue at his moment of need. As Jaeon described it to him, exobytes operate very much like living cells, but they also have an internal memory system that collects and stores information, biological and otherwise. This is how the exobytes were able to assimilate the various quirks and powers that were associated with them. This was also why, through intermingling of DNA, new information from different hosts is assimilated into the exobytes, causing new generations to inherit one or more quirks from their parents. A side effect of this data retention is it has the ability to capture and retain brainwaves from their hosts, including memories and even personality traits. Though All For One's presence was eradicated, when the quirk was passed down to him, an imprint of Hukaken was passed to him as well. To Izuku, this was both humbling and mystifying. Izuku was shaken out of his thoughts by a knock at the door. "Come in," he said. The door opened and Alfred stepped through, carrying a tray of food. "I thought perhaps you might be hungry after such an ordeal," said Alfred. "Thank you, Alfred," said Izuku. "I'll eat it later. I have to say, it is quite exciting to finally have you here," said Alfred, setting the tray down. "I have prepared the Batcave with some of your favorite training simulations. They will be waiting for you should you wish to use them." "Thank you, Alfred," said Izuku. They both turned at the sound of another knock on Izuku's door. Alfred immediately stood to answer it, revealing All Might standing in the doorway, shuffling awkwardly, as if he didn't quite know what to do with himself. "Master Yagi," said Alfred. "I hope I'm not interrupting," said All Might. "I can come back later." "Not at all," said Alfred, gesturing for All Might to enter. "I have other matters to attend to." He bowed and left, closing the door behind him. All Might and Izuku sat in awkward silence for about a minute before All Might spoke. "I'm glad to see that you're doing better," said All Might. "Thank you," said Izuku. "I have to say, you gave us a real scare," All Might continued. "They say that one of the most important parts of being a hero is conquering your inner demons, but I didn't think it would be so literal." He chuckled awkwardly at his own joke. He coughed awkwardly when Izuku didn't laugh. "What will happen, All Might?" said Izuku. "What do you mean?" All Might replied. "With your quirk," said Izuku. "One for all. Is it gone?" "No," said All Might. "It's not gone. But my body can no longer keep up with it." In a flash, he grew into his muscular form again, only to deflate a second later in a puff of smoke. He gasped and coughed, wiping blood from his mouth. "Until it passes to my successor, it will remain inside me, but in a dormant state." Izuku nodded, but said nothing. He raised his hand and began to produce sparks. "You have a powerful quirk of your own," said All Might. He suddenly looked very sad, dropping into a bow. "I'm sorry." "For what?" said Izuku, taken aback. "I never actually apologized to you," said All Might. "For what happened to your friend, or for what I said on that rooftop." "It's okay, All Might," said Izuku. "I don't blame you anymore." "You don't understand," said All Might, sitting down next to Izuku. "I once asked my master the same question, years ago. The exact same question. She believed in me, gave me her quirk and taught me to be a hero. And then fate, in its infinite wisdom, had placed me in a reverse role in the same scenario, and I failed to see in you what she saw in me." He let out a deep sigh. "I had become jaded, Midoriya," he continued. "Since my injury, I had lost sight of what was really important. I'd become..." He paused. "What did you call it?" "A one-trick pony living on borrowed time." "Ah," said Izuku, embarrassed. "Sorry about that." "You weren't wrong," said All Might. They sat in silence for a moment, Izuku pondering what All Might had told him. "I think I was more angry at myself than you," said Izuku, breaking the silence. "I knew that it was my fault that Kaken was dead. If I hadn't grabbed onto you like I did, you wouldn't have dropped the sludge villain." "You couldn't have anticipated that," said All Might. "But I knew nonetheless that I was the reason Kaken was dead," said Izuku. "But it felt better to blame you for it, to blame you for being told all my life that I couldn't be a hero because I was quirkless. But in the end, I guess you were right all along." "What do you mean?" said All Might. "I was captured by All For One," said Izuku. "If I had been stronger or if I had a quirk, then I wouldn't have been captured, and you wouldn't have lost your powers." "Young Midoriya," said All Might, horrified. The reality of what Izuku was saying pierced his heart like a javelin. Izuku blamed himself for the loss of his powers. "I admired you for so long, All Might," said Izuku, tears welling in his eyes. "For years I dreamed of being just like you. But in the end, I'm the reason you lost your power. If I had been stronger, like Kaken, then the world would still have its symbol of peace." All Might placed his arm around Izuku's shoulder. "Don't talk like that, young Midoriya," said All Might. "This isn't your fault. I was always going to lose my powers, and it had nothing to do with you. All For One simply used you like he uses everyone." Izuku said nothing, turning away to hide his tears. "In all honesty," continued All Might, "I think you're much stronger than I ever was." Izuku turned back to All Might, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I had to inherit a quirk to get strong," said All Might. "But you were already strong, even without a quirk. All it took was Bruce's training to bring it out." He's good at that. Where others see weakness, he sees potential, and can help you bring it to the surface. It's a talent that I've always been rather envious. Izuku wiped his tears from his eyes, his heart full. All Might and Izuku turned as they heard the sound of someone clearing their throat. Bruce was standing in the doorway. "Hate to interrupt your moment," he said, "but we have visitors." Izuku followed Bruce and All Might down the stairs and towards the parlor where their guests were waiting. Izuku half expected it to be Dick or Barbara come to see him now that he was finally visiting Gotham. But when they reached their location, they were greeted by two people Izuku didn't recognize, an American man with brown hair and glasses, wearing a simple button-down shirt and jeans, and a young woman, probably only a little older than Izuku. She wore glasses as well, with bright blue eyes shining underneath them, and full head of wavy blonde hair. All Might stopped dead when he saw them. "David," he said, laughing and embracing the man. "It's so good to see you." "It's good to see you too, All Might," he said, looking him up and down. "You look great." "Oh, you big liar," said All Might, laughing. He turned his attention to the young girl and embraced her. "Melissa, you've grown so much since I last saw you." "It's great to see you, Uncle Might," said the girl, beaming at him. Uncle Might, Izuku thought. It made sense now why Bruce insisted All Might come to Gotham. They were obviously friends of his. But just who are these people? "What are you doing here in Gotham?" said All Might. "I invited them," said Bruce, stepping forward. "David is being presented with a humanitarian award, and Wayne Enterprises volunteered to host it." "It's just another award," said David. "The real reason I came was when he told me you were coming." Bruce, All Might and David continued to chat among themselves. Izuku stood there awkwardly, feeling slightly out of place. As he looked away from the adults, his eyes crossed paths with the young girl, Melissa, who was staring right at him. He looked away, embarrassed for a second, but dared another glance in her direction. She still continued to stare at him, as if he was some exotic creature in a zoo. He cleared his throat, approaching her awkwardly. "Hello, my name is—" "I know exactly who you are," she said. Izuku was taken aback. You do," he said. "Papa, look who it is," she said to the man excitedly. He turned and focused on Izuku, his own look of excitement breaking onto his face. He walked over and began wringing Izuku's hand. "It's you," he said enthusiastically. "It's so great to meet you. You didn't tell me he was going to be here," he added, turning to Bruce. "Call it a surprise," said Bruce. "Hold on, how do you know me?" said Izuku. "Who are you?" "Oh, right," said the man. "My name is David Shield. This is my daughter, Melissa Shield." He gestured to his daughter, who smiled happily at Izuku. "And everyone knows who you are. You're the kid who took down the hero killer, not to mention the first quirkless student ever to attend UA High." "Oh, I see," said Izuku. It appeared that his reputation preceded him all the way in America as well. "Professor Shield is a scientist who makes support items for heroes," said Bruce. "He lives on my island and produces some of the greatest hero technology the world has ever seen." "You're from my island," said Izuku, amazed. "My island was an artificial, moving island. It housed over 10,000 scientists that produced some of the most advanced research on quirks and development of hero support items the world has ever seen." "I saw you at the sports festival as well," said Melissa. She approached Izuku and eyed him closely, and he felt himself blush under her inspection. She suddenly reached out and grabbed his hand, looking at the scars that lined them. "Those gauntlets you used were amazing, but they really wrecked your hands. Did you make them yourself?" "Kinda," said Izuku. "I designed them, but had help building them. The ones I used in the sports festival were prototypes, and they didn't survive. But I made new ones." "Can I see them?" she said excitedly. Izuku looked worriedly at Bruce, who simply nodded. "It's okay, Izuku," said Bruce. "David and Melissa have known my secret for some time now. They can be trusted. Take her down to the Batcave. But touch the Batmobile and you're fired," he added warningly. Izuku cleared his throat awkwardly. He couldn't tell if Bruce was being facetious or not, but he didn't dare push his luck, not after the last time he had taken the Batmobile out for a joyride. Bruce, All Might and David sat in the comfy overstuffed armchairs in the parlor as Alfred served them coffee and cake. All Might and David were laughing about their exploits during his time in America, while Bruce listened and sipped his coffee. And you should have seen the look on that villain's face," laughed David. "I swear, it cracks me up to this day." "What did you say to him, All Might?" "Clench your butt cheeks, punk, you're heading downtown," said All Might, chuckling as David roared with laughter. "Not one of my best one-liners, I'll admit." David took off his glasses and wiped his eyes, still laughing. "Those were good days," he said. "Boy, I remember when you two first met." He gestured between All Might and Bruce. "We were responding to a call and All Might had gotten away from me, and by the time I caught up, there he was, unconscious on the ground with the Batman standing over him. I almost had a heart attack. He caught me off guard, said All Might, embarrassed. What did you use on him, anyway? Asked David. Anesthetic gas, said Bruce, sipping his coffee. I was afraid you had killed him, said David. I already knew who he was and what he could do, said Bruce. The dose I gave him was enough to incapacitate Superman. It was a calculated risk, but it paid off. David took a sip from his coffee. I really miss those days, he said somberly. The world has been taking your retirement hard, All Might. It was a long time coming, said All Might. I've had a good run. But the world needs the symbol of peace, said David. There has to be a way to fix this. We've been over this, David, said All Might. There's no fixing this injury. They've tried. I know there's a way we can do it, said David. David, said All Might firmly, but kindly. It's okay, really. New heroes will take my place, heroes like Midoriya. My time has come to an end. I refuse to accept that, said David. It is what it is, said All Might. There's no changing it. All Might and David continued their conversation while Bruce sat in silence. David was one of All Might's biggest supporters, having been his former sidekick, and having designed all his costumes for him. He supposed that his reluctance to accept All Might's retirement was unsurprising. But there was something he couldn't shake. Something about the way he was talking gave him a bad feeling. Izuku and Melissa made their way to the library, where Izuku made his way to the old grandfather clock. Alfred had shown him that it was a hidden entrance that led to the Batcave. After it opened, he and Melissa stared in amazement as the lights flickered on, illuminating the cave and everything in it. It was the first time that Izuku had been in the cave, and had expected it to be like the warehouse back home. But it was so much more than that. The cave went on for miles. There was a natural waterfall that drained into a lake down below, which could be seen when looking over the side of the platform they were on. There were several floors to the Batcave. Where they were standing, Izuku could see the giant supercomputer that Batman used in his investigation, as well as a large workbench. To the right of the computer was the armory, where Batman stored his costumes, tools, and weapons. On the next platform, he could make out what looked to be a giant dinosaur, standing next to a giant penny, as well as various other items that were encased in glass. Izuku knew this is where Bruce kept the evidence from his cases, and Alfred had set it up as a museum of sorts. Izuku could make out other platforms that housed the Batmobile and various other vehicles, as well as what looked to be a makeshift medical station and laboratory. Alfred had told him that there were several other areas that continued deeper into the cave, such as the training area and simulation rooms. This place is amazing, said Melissa. Her voice echoed on the cave walls, causing a few bats that hung from the roof of the cave to fly off into the distance. Izuku couldn't help but share in her excitement as they looked around. Soon, they made their way to the workbench. Alfred had already brought many of Izuku's items down to the Batcave when he had arrived. As soon as he had produced his explosive gauntlets, Melissa immediately seized them and inspected them enthusiastically. It looks like you used a feeding system to pump a nitroglycerin-like substance into the palms and fingers, she said, looking them over. Pretty clever, but how do you control the payload? The dials on the wrists are used to control the dosage, said Izuku, showing her. There are pressure-sensitive indicators on the fingers that allow me to control the explosions. He put one of the gloves on, demonstrating for her. When my fist is clenched, the explosions will come from the knuckles and fingers upon impact. When my hand is open, he demonstrated, opening his hand. I tap my forefinger and thumb to initiate a blast from the palms. That's spectacular, said Melissa. Izuku took the glove off and handed it back to her. You can keep them, he said. You mean it, she said excitedly. Of course, said Izuku. I don't need them anymore. Melissa paused, placing the gauntlets on the table and eyeing Izuku curiously. Is it true then? She asked. Is what true? Said Izuku. It was all over the news, said Melissa. Is it true that you have a quirk now? Izuku didn't answer right away, instead turning away from Melissa and walking over towards the edge of the platform that led to the outer expanse of the Batcave. Izuku raised his hand, which erupted in an explosion that echoed loudly throughout the Batcave. Izuku turned back to Melissa, smoke emanating from his palm. She rushed over and grabbed onto his hand, examining it. It's just like your gauntlets, she said. A nitroglycerin-like substance that can be detonated at will. How did this happen? It's complicated, said Izuku. She waited for more explanation, but Izuku didn't offer it, instead walking over and resting on the guard railing. Melissa walked over and joined him, leaning against the railing and looking towards the roof of the cave. I'm quirkless too, she said. Izuku was taken aback. You are. Melissa nodded. I wanted to be a hero too, just like Uncle Might, she said. But I was told that I couldn't because I didn't have a quirk. I can relate, said Izuku. But that's one of the reasons why I decided to make support items, Melissa continued. It was a way I could be a hero to others, by helping them be heroes. But you, she turned back to Izuku. You actually did it. Even though you were quirkless, you still defied the odds and went to UA to become a hero. I've had a lot of help, said Izuku, embarrassed. But you still did it, she said. And I think that's amazing. Izuku blushed. But I'm not quirkless anymore, he said. That doesn't matter, said Melissa. It just means that you've got more to help you become a great hero. And who knows, maybe I'll design your support items. I'd really like that. So would I, said Izuku. What's it like to live on an island? You'll just have to come and see for yourself, said Melissa. I'd like that too, said Izuku, chuckling. As they continued their discussion, Izuku couldn't help but feel that Melissa was more than just a friend to him. She was more like a kindred spirit, someone cut from the same cloth. It was nice to see that he wasn't as alone in the world as he thought he was. Izuku tugged uncomfortably at his bow tie around his neck. He was wearing an expensive three-piece tuxedo, courtesy of Alfred and Bruce. It was tailored to fit like a glove, and Izuku, who was unused to such formal attire, found it restraining and uncomfortable. He stood next to Bruce and Alfred in a large ballroom as they welcomed patrons as they came, filling the room to the brim with all members of high society. Izuku watched Bruce curiously as he met with the guests. He became a completely different person in the eyes of the public. For someone who knew who the real Bruce Wayne was, it was fascinating to watch. It was close to the start of the gala, and the room was glittering with beautiful colors and sparkling like gold and diamonds. Izuku felt completely out of place, having grown up in a middle-class home all his life. They were still awaiting their guests of honor, David and Melissa, who were running late. Izuku was looking forward to seeing Melissa again, but was still quite nervous. Would he be expected to dance with her? He had never danced with a girl before. The idea of it made his legs quake in his shoes. David, said Bruce suddenly. Izuku looked up to see David, All Might and Melissa stepping out of a limousine, courtesy of Wayne Enterprises. David and All Might were both wearing tuxedos, but Izuku wasn't paying attention to them. His jaw dropped as he laid eyes on Melissa. She was wearing a blue and white strapless dress, which extended to her knees. She wore a black ribbon tied around her waist tied off with an ornate white rose. Her wavy blonde hair was done up in a curly ponytail. She wasn't wearing her glasses, and Izuku was floored at how much more her vibrant blue eyes shined in the light of the room without them. David and All Might approached and shook Bruce and Alfred's hands firmly. Melissa curtsied to the men and immediately went to Izuku. Hey, Izuku, she said, looking him up and down. You look nice. Thanks, said Izuku. He could feel himself blushing immensely. So do you. Now that you're here, the festivities can really begin, said Bruce, guiding them over to their table at the head of the room. The orchestra began another chord, this time a slower tempo. Melissa immediately peeked her head in their direction, grabbing Izuku by the hand and taking him to the dance floor before he could think. Come on, Izuku, she said. Let's dance. Well, said Izuku, panicking internally. I'm not much of a dancer. That's okay, she replied. I am. She took one of Izuku's hands and put it on her hip, a forward motion that made him blush furiously. She took her hand and placed it on his back, pulling him in close. This was the closest he had ever been to a girl, and he felt his heart was going to beat from his chest. As they swayed with the soft music, Izuku found himself growing more and more comfortable with Melissa. They talked and laughed as they danced, discussing their hopes and dreams and life ambitions. Eventually, the orchestra ceased their strings, and they were beckoned back to their table with Bruce, David, Alfred, and All Might for dinner. Izuku couldn't remember when he had had such a good time. David and All Might were telling amazing stories about their time together in their younger years. Izuku was fascinated to learn more about David and his research in quirks and support items. He was even called in by the Justice League as the principal scientist for the construction of the Watchtower, and regularly supplied them with the most advanced technology and research that Island had to offer. After their meals were finished, Bruce took to the podium at the center stage, gathering the attention of the audience. Tonight is a very special night, he said. In a world filled to the brim with professional heroes, it is almost commonplace to see them rewarded and praised for their hard work and sacrifice, placing their lives on the line every day so society as a whole can function. However, tonight is not the night for these heroes. Behind every hero is a powerful support tool, and behind every support tool, he gestured to David, is a powerful support scientist. The audience applauded as David took the podium, taking the award from Bruce. He beamed to the audience as they continued their applause. I tried to write a speech, he said, once the cheers died. But I'm not very good at it. I suppose I'll have to. As he continued his speech, Izuku noticed someone emerge from the doors behind them. It was one of the waitresses, pushing a large cake box on a cart towards their table. Izuku didn't think much of it at first, thinking it was part of the celebration, until he looked over at his mentor. Bruce was watching the cake get wheeled in. His smile vanished completely. Something was wrong. David noticed the waitress behind him, pausing his speech. "Bruce, you shouldn't have," said David. He went to open the box when in a flash, the top of the box exploded, revealing a man in a purple suit with toxic green hair bursting from the top of the cake inside. "Surprise!" he shouted, laughing maniacally and grabbing David by the throat. He produced a gun and thrust it against his cheek. Melissa screamed, and Izuku jumped to his feet in shock. "The Joker. Greetings, Gotham," he said to the audience. "Joker's back in town." The audience began to panic, all attempting to run for the exit. The doors around them burst open, revealing several armed thugs in clown masks and makeup entering the room. They began rounding up the guests, firing their guns into the air to frighten them into compliance. One of the henchmen came from behind them and grabbed Melissa. Izuku sprang into action, landing a hard kick square in the goon's face. He howled in pain and fell onto his back. He grabbed Melissa and ran towards the back towards Bruce, All Might and Alfred, who formed a protective circle around her. "Izuku," said Bruce, "go with Toshinori and Alfred. Get Melissa out of here." Without another word, he dashed off towards the Joker, taking down the armed henchmen as he went. Izuku scanned the room for an exit. The room was heavily guarded, and the mass chaos caused by the hysterical guests around them made it difficult to get his bearings. 3 thugs made their way over towards them, brandishing their weapons menacingly. Izuku leapt forward into a twisting front handspring, using the momentum from the spin to kick the guns out of their hands. Izuku continued his attack, kicking one of them in the abdomen, causing him to double over, where Izuku seized his chance to knee him in the face, knocking him unconscious. The other 2 stared in shock, allowing Izuku time to draw 2 glue capsules from his utility belt tucked under his tuxedo shirt and toss them at the thugs. The capsules exploded on impact, encasing them in glue. So much for no heroics, Izuku thought. "This way, young Midoriya," said All Might. He had found an exit and was guiding them through it, shutting the door behind them. They made their way through a dark access corridor for maintenance. Izuku held tightly to Melissa's hand, holding 3 batarangs in his other hand. They didn't know if there were any armed henchmen waiting for them at the end of the corridor, and he didn't want to take any chances. "Stop," said Melissa, pulling on Izuku. "We have to go back. We have to save my dad." "Out of the question," said Alfred immediately. "Our first priority is to your safety, as Master Bruce instructed, young lady." "But the Joker will kill him," said Melissa. "Not while Bruce is around," said All Might, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Trust me, Melissa. If anyone can handle the Joker, it's Bruce." Melissa sniffled, but straightened. A courageous look passed over her face that Izuku recognized all too well. She was frightened for the safety of her father, but knew that he would want her safe first and foremost. For his sake, she would have to be brave. She really is something else, thought Izuku. "Let's go, you 3, said Alfred. "I have called the Batmobile. It should be approaching shortly. If we can make it to the back alley, it should be waiting for us." "Why are you doing this?" shouted David hoarsely. The Joker tightened his grip on his throat and pressed the nozzle of his pistol hard into his cheek. "Let these people go. I'll pay whatever you want." "I don't want your money," said the Joker. "I want what I paid for." "What are you talking about?" said David. "Don't play stupid with me, Davy Pooh," the Joker replied, his sing-songy voice turning to a dangerous tone. "You didn't think I gave you all that money and fancy doodads for the sake of charity. Where's the fun in that?" "Hugh," said David, horrified. "You're Jack White, among other people," said the Joker. "Not everyone is who they say they are. You really should be careful who to talk to on the internet, young man." "What would you poor mother think?" "You can't have the device," said David. "I won't let you. You seem to think you have a choice in the matter," said Joker. "That's hilarious." David scanned the room, looking desperately for his daughter and the others. He only hoped that his daughter was safe. This was all his fault. If it wasn't for his fear and pride, he wouldn't be in this situation, putting all these lives in danger, especially his daughter's. He should have never invented. "Let him go, Joker." David looked up to see Bruce breaking through the crowd of armed henchmen. They immediately began to form, but David knew they were no match for Bruce, mowing them down one by one. "Ooh," said Joker, interested. "This rich kitty has claws." Bruce tried to make his way to David, but the Joker fired the gun at his feet. Bruce froze in place as more henchmen encircled them. Bruce stood straight, smoothing out the front of his tuxedo. "Let's be reasonable about this, Joker," said Bruce, taking out his pocketbook. "I can write all kinds of numbers on this check. Name your price." Joker fired his gun again, knocking the checkbook out of Bruce's hand, who amazingly didn't flinch. "What is it with you fat cats trying to throw money at your problems?" said Joker. "Talk about ruining the punchline. Then what is it that you want?" said Bruce. "Surely we can." Joker fired his gun again, this time striking Bruce squarely in the chest, who hit the floor in a crumpled heap. "No," shouted David. "Surely we can, said Joker mockingly. "Rich people are so boring. But hey, maybe the Grim Reaper takes checks." He reared his head back in maniacal laughter as David watched in horror as the henchmen encircled Bruce's body. Izuku, Melissa, Alfred and All Might continued their way down the corridor. Izuku felt himself growing more and more nervous. He could still hear gunfire from behind them, and he had no idea how close the police were to their location, if they were coming at all. They were almost to the exit leading to the back alleyway. As soon as the others were safe, Izuku was going back for Bruce and David. They stopped abruptly as they heard screaming coming from the end of the hallway. A waitress came running towards them. She looked terrified, mascara streaming down her cheeks from her tears. All Might immediately ran to her, trying to calm her down. "It's okay, miss," said All Might. "We're not going to hurt you." "Tell us what happened," said Alfred. "These armed men tried to grab me and put me with the rest of those people," said the woman. "I got away, but they almost killed me. She broke into racking sobs, sinking to her knees. "You're safe now, miss," said All Might. "Come with us and we'll get you out of here." The woman continued to sob for a minute before she took deep breaths, steadying herself. Finally she nodded, sniffling slightly, and stood, following them behind Melissa. They continued to make their way down the hallway, finally coming upon the alleyway exit. Upon opening the door, they were immediately accosted by several armed henchmen. They quickly overpowered them, forcing each of them to their knees. "Look at that, they did come out this way," said one of the henchmen. "Looks like you were right, Harley." Izuku immediately looked back at Melissa. She was the only one of them standing, her hands tied behind her and her mouth bound with a gag. The woman was standing behind her, holding her by the back of the neck. Her frightened demeanor was gone, instead replaced with a cold smile. "Of course they did, you idiot," said the woman. "Mr. J said they would." "Let go of her," said Izuku. The woman kicked him hard in the face. "Shut up, bird boy," she snapped. "Mr. J ain't quite ready for you yet, so stay put and don't do anything stupid." She pulled out a small device from her pocket and pressed it, causing it to start beeping. "Let's get out of here, girly, and make sure they don't follow us," she added to her henchmen, walking away with Melissa. Izuku watched them helplessly as they got into a car at the end of the alleyway and drove off. Izuku looked up at the henchmen only to see one of them approach and hit him hard in the face with the butt of his gun. Izuku keeled over, hearing the yells of Alfred and All Might before everything went black. David could hear a faint beeping amidst the chaos. It was coming from the Joker. He had reached into his coat pocket and took out a small device resembling a pager. He nodded with approval before placing it back in his suit coat. "Looks like we have our prize," said the Joker. He placed the gun back into David's cheek. "And if you want her back, you better have the device ready by sunup." "What are you talking about?" said David. "What did you do?" "All in good time, Davy Wavy," said the Joker, releasing him. A large explosion came from the glass ceiling of the ballroom. David looked up to see a large helicopter hovering over the opening in the glass, a rope ladder dropping down next to the Joker. "Time to fly, boys," said the Joker, taking off with the helicopter, laughing crazily as he climbed higher into the air. David watched as the helicopter carried him away from the ballroom and off into the distance. The henchmen all followed suit, exiting as they had come. Several of the henchmen were still circling around Bruce. David ran towards them in a panic, desperately trying to pull one of them away from him. The henchman knocked David onto his back and pointed his rifle at him. David braced himself for the inevitable. It never came. He gingerly opened his eyes to see all the henchmen were down, unconscious, with Bruce standing over them, holding the henchman that knocked David down by the throat before thrusting his elbow hard into his neck, knocking him unconscious. "Bruce," said David, "I thought you were dead." "Hardly," said Bruce. He pulled open his tuxedo shirt to show he was wearing a Kevlar vest. "Where's Melissa and the others?" said David. Bruce checked his watch, which projected a holographic image. "The Batmobile is still parked out back. They must still be here. Come on." Izuku's head felt like it was splitting open. Blurry images began to form as he opened his eyes, gradually coming into focus. He was back in the Batcave, laying on one of the stretchers in the medical wing. He tried to stand, but something was holding him down. "Don't try to move," said Alfred. "You've suffered a nasty concussion." "Alfred," said Izuku. He tried to remember what happened as realization dawned on him with sickening horror. "Melissa." "I know," said another voice. Bruce had appeared at Alfred's side. Alfred told me the whole story. Where's David? Said Izuku. He's upstairs, said Bruce. All Might is trying to console him. We have to save her, said Izuku. We aren't going to do anything, said Bruce. I will find the Joker. You are going to stay here. I can't just. Yes you can, said Bruce sharply. You promised your mother no heroics, and you're going to keep that promise. You're going back to Japan, first thing tomorrow. What? Said Izuku. You can't send me back now. I can and I will, said Bruce. You have no idea what the Joker is capable of. You're not ready for this. I can't leave until I know Melissa is safe, said Izuku. This conversation is over, said Bruce. Alfred, take Midoriya to his room so he can rest. Alfred complied, helping Izuku off the stretcher. They walked in silence as they made their way to Izuku's room. Try not to take it too hard, Izuku, said Alfred once they made it to his room. Master Bruce only wants you to be safe. You will see Miss Shield's safe return. Izuku said nothing, sitting on his bed silently as Alfred left the room. Was at war with himself. He cursed himself for letting Melissa get captured, wishing he had thought to use his quirk. He was still so used to not having one, it hadn't occurred to him to use it. Who knows what they were going to do to her? He couldn't bear to think about it, and it was all his fault. 10 minutes later, Bruce was poring over data files on his computer, desperately trying to pick up a trail that could lead him to the Joker. He still had no idea as to why David was targeted tonight, only that he had something that the Joker wanted. David was beside himself with grief, and All Might was still trying to console him. Hopefully, once he was calmer, Bruce would be able to get more information from him as to what the Joker wanted. That might point him in the direction. Master Bruce. Alfred came running frantically into the Batcave. Master Bruce, Izuku is gone, he said. What? Said Bruce, alarmed. I came upstairs to give him tea. When his window was open and his hero costume was gone, said Alfred. This was on his bed. He handed a small device to Bruce. It was a radio receiver. Izuku somehow managed to plant a tracking device on Harley Quinn before she left with Melissa. He left it there so Bruce would follow him, but not before he got a head start, to keep him from stopping him. Damn it, said Bruce angrily. The engines of the Batmobile roared as he quickly donned his cape and cowl, and sped off into the distance. Before he could return upstairs, something on Bruce's desk caught his eye. Upon inspecting it, he had to steady himself against the desk for fear of falling over with fright. It was a picture of Izuku from the sports festival, but encircled in a green smiley face, crossed out at his face, reading the words, "You know what happens when you bring friends into this game of ours." Dear God, thought Alfred. Bring him home safely, Master Bruce. Please. Izuku stood perched on the edge of a building. He was overlooking what looked to be an abandoned toy factory, using the thermal vision of his cowl to view the interior. He could see a body heat signature in the middle of the old shop floor. It wasn't moving, and seemed to be strapped to a chair. It had to be Melissa. Surrounding her were other heat signatures, some patrolling the around floor, some standing still. He counted at least 24 men, and upon switching to detective mode in his cowl goggles, he confirmed that each of them were armed. Most of them had guns, some carried blunt instruments or knives. Izuku was thoroughly outnumbered and outgunned. It was an obvious trap, and Izuku intended to spring it. He felt guilty for leaving Wayne Manor after Bruce forbade him to involve himself. He remembered his escapade with the Batmobile when searching for the sludge villain, and was afraid of what Bruce might do to him for disobeying him this time. But seeing how frightened Melissa was when she was taken, and how helpless he was to stop her, he had to do something. He had to save her. Steeling himself, he checked his utility belt and secured his gauntlets at the wrists. They were newly upgraded from Wayne Tech, designed to work with his explosion quirk. But he had to be careful. The events of his clash with the hero killer flashed in his mind. If he used his quirk as an unlicensed hero, he doubted that even Bruce would be able to save him from facing criminal charges. He had to use his quirk as a last resort. Melissa struggled at her restraints. She was surrounded by armed guards, and the woman Harley Quinn was shouting orders to them. From what she had gathered, they were planning to ransom her to her father. Harley had told her that she wasn't going to be hurt if she cooperated. But Melissa was still frightened. She had heard the stories and seen the reports of what the Joker did to his hostages. Most of the time, they did not survive, even when the ransoms were paid. Melissa jumped at a loud explosion emanating from the other end of the factory. She heard several screams and what sounded like gunfire. Flames began to grow as the old toys on the abandoned conveyor belts began to catch fire. "The bat's here," shouted Harley. "You two stay here." She gestured to 2 of the guards. "The rest of you, find him." The guards converged on the explosion, Harley following them, leaving Melissa alone with the 2 guards. Harley and the guards struggled desperately to put out the fire, not wanting the inevitable attention it would draw to their location if it grew. Melissa heard a brief grunting sound from her captors next to her, looking up only to see both of them laying sprawled out on the floor before her, unconscious, with a dark figure in combat armor standing over them. Izuku began, but he swiftly covered her mouth, putting his finger to his lips to silence her. She nodded, and he let her go and began to work on her restraints. "That won't distract them for long," he whispered. "Just long enough to." Something hard and heavy crashed against his side, sending him flying away from Melissa. Harley was back, carrying a heavy mallet in her hand. "You must think I'm some sorta idiot, don'tcha?" she said, swinging the mallet as Izuku struggled to his feet. "He's over here, boys," she shouted as the men converged on their location. "Remember, Mr. J doesn't want him dead yet. Just rough him up a little." Izuku stood his ground as the men surrounded him. One of them advanced on him, swinging a heavy bat. He ducked swiftly under the blow and struck the man hard in the abdomen. Doubling over, Izuku delivered a swift knee to his nose, knocking him onto his back. He flipped over the assailant and grabbed his arm, twisting it until hearing the sickening snap of bones cracking. The man howled with pain and rolled over, passing out. Two other thugs charged him, both of them activating their quirks. Izuku noticed for one of them, his hand began to swell immensely until it took a round, bulbous form before shaping into a spiked morning star, a chain extending from his wrist. Swirling his mace fist over his head, he threw it crashing down on Izuku's location, who had dodged moments before. The other appeared to have a shooting-like quirk, shots firing from his fingertips and embedding themselves in the wall behind Izuku as he dodged. Izuku reached into his belt and threw 2 sticky grenades at the gunman's hands, encasing them in thick glue. "What the hell?" he shouted, trying to free himself, ultimately receiving a hard kick upside the head from Izuku for his lack of awareness, knocking him unconscious. The mace man continued to swing his morning star towards Izuku. After dodging it a second time, the mace embedded itself in the ground, and the man struggled to retrieve it. Izuku seized his chance and threw an explosive batarang at the man. Upon striking his chest, the explosion sent him careening backwards, hitting the wall hard and losing consciousness. "Take it easy on my boys, bird brain," said Harley indignantly. Izuku ignored her, pressing his attack. 3 more guards advanced on him. One of them began throwing knives at Izuku, which seemed to form directly from his skin as he threw them. Izuku dodged the knives as the 2 others attacked him. Izuku analyzed that they were both strength-type quirk users. As they attacked him, Izuku found himself backed against a wall, dodging a punch to his head as his attacker's fist broke through the wall behind him. Izuku rolled between the attackers, placing explosive mines on their backs as he did. He pressed the detonator and they both went flying through the damaged wall, debris landing atop them. Izuku readied himself for the next attack, but the thugs didn't press the attack. A shrill laugh erupted over the old speaker system of the factory, sending a chill up Izuku's spine. Izuku turned to see a large projection spring to life on the wall behind him. It was the Joker. "Well done, newbie," said the Joker, laughing maniacally. "I often keep asking myself, how does Batman do it? Taking in hopeless strays and lost causes and turning them into stone-cold vigilantes. Where do I sign up for Batman boot camp?" "Let Melissa go, Joker," said Izuku, with more bravery than he actually felt. "I can't do that, dummy, she's my trump card," said Joker crossly. "For what?" said Izuku. "What do you want with her?" "I don't want her," said Joker. "Aren't you listening? She's just an ace in the hole." "Sheesh, and I thought all the Robins were smart." "I'm not a Robin," said Izuku. "I should say not," said Joker. "But keep studying and you'll get there, don't you worry." His laughter continued. "You haven't answered my question, Joker," said Izuku. "What do you want?" "Oh, nothing," said Joker. "Millions dead in the streets would be nice if you're offering." "You're insane," said Izuku. "Well, duh," said Joker, contorting his face into a dumb expression. "But to be honest, I really didn't think that you would come here alone tonight. I expected to get to kill you later. But hey, as I always say, a bird in hand is worth 2 in the blender." Izuku's stomach turned as Joker continued his horrific laughter. His henchmen drew closer towards him, but didn't attack. "Because you've been such a good boy," he continued. "Your old Uncle Jay is going to give you a taste of tonight's festivities." He reached into his coat and pulled a small remote control, pressing a button on it. The factory seemed to spring to life, and the conveyor belt started moving, carrying a large metal container towards him. Large bangs and crashes came from the container before it came to a stop. Joker pressed another button, and the container opened, and Izuku stepped back in shock at what he saw. At first, he thought it was a Namu, but it did not have an exposed brain as the others had. Instead, it reminded Izuku of something you would see in a haunted house. A large, grotesque creature with a rippling, misshapen muscular frame. Its eyes glowed blood red and it emitted a guttural, growling roar as it tore itself from the box. "Well, kid, it was nice knowing you," said Joker. "Who am I kidding? I barely know you." He roared his head back in shrill laughter as the monster ran forward. Izuku steeled himself. His experience with the Namu told him that he would have to use everything he had against this creature. He had no choice. He would have to. A loud crash sounded above Izuku. He looked up to see that someone had broken through the glass windows above, half expecting it to be Batman. But it was someone he didn't recognize. The intruder hit the ground, gracefully rolling to lessen the impact of his fall. He was wearing a brown leather jacket and bright red helmet, carrying 2 heavy pistols. "Hit the deck, kid," he shouted. Izuku immediately dropped to the floor as the man opened rapid fire from his pistols, mowing down Joker's men effortlessly. The bullets appeared to have no effect on the monster, who kept charging, this time towards the stranger. He leapt out of the way as the monster attempted to grab him, firing his pistols square in the monster's face. The creature roared in pain, slamming into the wall as it continued to run. This attack must have dazed it, as it began to stumble and grasp in front of it, trying to find its quarry. "Ew," said the Joker, interested. "Enter player 2. Are you gonna lay there all night or are you gonna fight?" said the man to Izuku. He leapt to his feet and launched several explosive blasts from his hands, knocking the monster off its feet. As it struggled, several of the Joker's henchmen rallied and began attacking them. The man met them with equal force, dodging their attacks and knocking them down, only to finish them off with a shot from his guns. The creature roared and struggled to its feet, lunging for Izuku, who used his quirk to launch over the monster's head, blasting it from behind. The creature hollered in pain, trying to grasp through the smoke. It began to charge Izuku, who threw several explosive batarangs at the creature's face, exploding on impact. The creature reared back in pain, clutching its face and grasping forward at Izuku. The man had finished with Joker's henchmen and leapt up on the monster's shoulders, placing both pistols on each side of its head and opening fire. The monster's blood and gray matter burst from its skull as it hit the ground hard and lay still. "Well, that was unexpected," said the Joker. "Note to self, need stronger test subjects. Well, thank you for being part of this little game. I guess it's time to go." The projection went dark and the Joker was gone. "Come back, you coward," shouted the man. "Mr. J. Wait," said Harley, running towards the projection. The man in the helmet walked forward towards Harley, knocking her down and placing his gun on her forehead. "Where is he hiding, Quinn?" he said dangerously. "Answer me. What makes you think all?" She was interrupted by a blast from his gun, just to the left of her head. She recoiled from the sound, screaming and clutching her ears. "The next one goes in your brain, Quinn," said the man. "Joker doesn't care if you live or die. You may as well answer my questions." "He loves me," said Harley indignantly. The man backhanded her across the face with his pistol, causing her face to bleed. Izuku stepped forward to stop him, but the man pointed his other pistol at him, not looking away from Harley. "I'll give you 5 seconds to tell me, starting from 3, said the man, cocking his gun. 4. Something stepped forward beside Izuku, quickly seizing the man's hand with a heavy, gauntleted glove, holding his gun aloft. "That's enough," said Batman. "Stop this, Jason. 1 week earlier, I was wondering when you would come to me." Ra's al Ghul poured himself a drink, sitting at his desk in his luxurious private quarters high atop his mountain palace. Batman had arrived suddenly, just as he did, and nearly dislocated his arm as he interrogated him. He had let him go when Ra's called off his men, willing to answer any of his questions. "What happened that day?" said Batman. "Answer me this first," said Ra's. "How did you find out it was him?" "Fighting styles are like fingerprints," said Batman. "I worked with him for years, taught him everything he knows. He has adapted to incorporate various weapons and firearms, but after observing surveillance recordings of him is what aroused my suspicions. Upon examining the forensic report from the Roman Siona's murder, a blood sample was found that did not match Siona's or any of his men. After running it against his medical records, my suspicions were confirmed. The Red Hood is Jason Todd." "Very good, detective," said Ra's al Ghul. "But how do you know I am involved?" "When I exhumed his body, I discovered it wasn't his body at all," said Batman. "A well-made mannequin made of high-end latex, made to look like him. I admit, it was careless of me not to see it before. Only you could have had the motive and means to replace his body with a fake." "Precisely," said Ra's al Ghul. "Truly, the world's greatest detective does it again." "Don't test me, Ra's," said Batman dangerously. "Tell me what I want to know." "Apologies," said Ra's al Ghul. "You remember our last encounter. You wanted to blow up banks." "True, if inelegant," said Ra's al Ghul. "I was close to toppling the economy in Europe. But you were on to me. I sought a distraction, so I hired the Joker. It was to appear that you stumbled upon him by accident in Bosnia. It was intended to be a wild goose chase, but I overestimated my ability to control the clown and underestimated his madness. His capture and murder of Robin was not my design. You were not the only one working to find the boy, but he was already dead before we had reached him. It was my greatest regret and my greatest shame. You've never shied away from killing before, said Batman. True, but always with a purpose, said Ra's al Ghul. This was senseless, an unnecessary casualty. As penance, I sought to never make war with you again. What about the hero killer? Said Batman. He was never truly one of us, replied Ra's al Ghul. He left us of his own volition to pursue his mission. Crossing paths with your new ward was simply happenstance. In addition to this truce, I also sought to rectify what had happened. Rectify? Yes, said Ra's al Ghul. I had hoped to return to you what you had lost. Before you could reach the boy, we replaced him with the mannequin and took him to the Lazarus Pit. As you know, its rejuvenating waters have allowed me to walk this world for 6 centuries. It was rumored that it could even achieve a greater feat, raising the dead. I was confident you would not perform an autopsy on your boy, and even if you did, we would still have the time to bring him back. But the plan had unfortunate results. It had restored his life, but he had returned to this world damaged. Batman clenched his fist tightly, but said nothing. All of this had happened to his ward, his son, right under his nose. If he had bothered to check the body before burying it, he would have known that it wasn't flesh. He was beset with grief, but it was stupid. Stupid and careless. He had escaped us immediately after the ritual, Ra's al Ghul continued. My armies searched for months, but we were never able to recover a body or pick up a trail. I thought him dead yet again. He stood from his desk, turning away from Batman, looking out the window. But I have returned your son to you as a blight upon your house. He burns the very kingdom he turned back to face Batman. But he was gone. He took a deep sigh, returning to his desk. Good luck, detective. So, you figured it out, old man, said Jason, pulling away from Batman. I suppose Ra's spilled his guts, too. Izuku was shocked, looking back and forth between the two men. He could hardly believe his eyes. He was staring at his predecessor, the deceased Jason Todd. Batman's face continued to remain passive, and Jason's expression could not be read with his red mask, but the anger and hatred in his voice was palpable. Why didn't you come back to me? Said Batman. Why would I? Jason spat back. The Joker had kept me in that warehouse for months, torturing me and turning me against you. Did you even try to look for me? Of course I did, said Batman. I never stopped looking. The Joker sent me the video. I watched you die, and the League of Shadows was still able to get to me before you, said Jason. I can help you, Jason, said Batman. I don't want your help, shouted Jason. I want to finish what you refused to. You couldn't save me in time, I can understand that. But why, in God's green earth? He pointed to where the Joker's projection was. Is he still alive? Jason, Batman began. He took me away from you, said Jason, backing away from Batman and Izuku. But even then, you refused to put an end to the pain he causes, the destruction he has caused. Not anymore. I'm going to put an end to it, once and for all. Jason, please, said Batman. This doesn't have to be this way. Come back with me. Come home. It's too late, said Jason. It's not my home anymore. Besides, he looked to Izuku. You've already replaced me. Without another word, he reached into his coat and threw a flashbang grenade, causing Izuku and Batman to leap out of the way, shielding Quinn and Melissa from the blast. When the dust cleared, Jason was gone. Batman, said Izuku. Batman, I'm sorry. But Bruce didn't appear to be listening. He continued to stare at the spot Jason once stood. After a minute, he stooped and cuffed Harley Quinn before throwing her over his shoulder while Izuku released Melissa from her bindings. You disobeyed a direct order, said Batman. You put yourself and Melissa in danger and used your quirk as an unlicensed hero. The Batmobile is waiting outside. Get Melissa back to the Batcave. Now, Project Titan. What does Joker want with David's shield, Quinn? Harley Quinn was knocked unconscious from the grenade detonated by the man in the red hood. When she finally came to, she was suspended upside down over inside an elevator shaft, face to face with the Batman. I ain't talking, Bat, said Quinn. Tonight is not a good night to test me, Quinn, said Batman dangerously. Do yourself a favor and tell me what I want to know. You'll never get nothing out of me, B-Man, said Quinn defiantly. The Joker left you for dead, said Batman. If I hadn't gotten there in time, the Red Hood would have scattered your brains across the floor, and the Joker would be looking for a new sidekick. Shut your face, B-Man, said Quinn angrily. He loves me. He would do anything for me. Then where is he now, you little fool? Said Batman. You're going back to Arkham, but first you're going to tell me what you know. Shut up, she said. I'll never betray Mr. J. Shield's gonna give him what he wants, and the Titan formula's gonna be perfect. Then will she stopped, her eyes wide. Thanks, Quinn, said Batman, turning to leave. Hey, you ain't gonna just leave me here, said Quinn indignantly. The police will be by shortly, said Batman. So hang tight. Real funny, Batbrain, said Harley. You'll see. Mr. J will come for me. You'll see, she added quietly as Batman disappeared. Izuku watched as David and Melissa embraced when they reached Wayne Manor, tears following freely as they rejoiced in their reunion. The Batmobile had taken them home, but Batman did not accompany them and had not returned yet. As he stood in the parlor with Melissa, David, All Might and Alfred, Izuku couldn't help but feel nervous. He knew he was in for it this time, and was secretly dreading facing his mentor again. But somehow, seeing Melissa reunited with her father made the inevitable punishment he would receive worth it. I was so frightened, said David. I was afraid he would kill you. He let her go and walked to Izuku, pulling him into a surprise embrace as well. Thank you so much for saving my little girl. I'm so happy you're safe, Melissa, said All Might. Do we have any idea why the Joker took you in the first place? A good question. Everyone turned to see Bruce emerge from the open clock leading to the Batcave. He was still in his batsuit, but his cowl and cape had been discarded. It's because he's been working with the Joker, said Bruce. What? Said All Might. What's he talking about, David? Bruce pulled up a holo projection on his gauntlet computer. He was projecting some sort of scientific file, named Project Titan, detailing numerous experiments with Quirk-enhancing drugs and technology, including experiments on human test subjects. Izuku watched in horror as he saw an experiment video on the projection. A test subject was administered the drug and the test subject began to grow at an immense pace. His skin began to tear and he shrieked in pain as his muscles grew. The subject continued to grow and began tearing up the lab. David shouted to have his aides sedate him when the camera was knocked over, screams and loud crashes emanating off-screen. You've been conducting illegal Quirk-enhancing experiments for the past year and a half, said Bruce. Shut it off, said David, looking away. His face had drained of color and he looked sick. Please, shut it off. David, said All Might, shocked. What is this? It's a Quirk-enhancing drug, said Bruce. 100 times more powerful than anything you can get on the market. Most Quirk enhancers only last about an hour at best, but this one seems to be permanent. He's been making it for the Joker. I didn't know it was him, said David. You have to believe me. I don't have to believe anything. David, said Bruce. You better tell me everything. Now, David took a few deep breaths, sitting down on one of the armchairs. After a moment, he collected himself, sighing deeply. Can we please not talk about this in front of Melissa? Said David. No, Papa, said Melissa. I want to know too. Melissa, David began. I think she is entitled to know as well, said Bruce. She's just a child, said David indignantly. She won't understand. She was kidnapped tonight due to your mistakes, Bruce shot back. And from what I have seen of her, she's smart enough and old enough to make her own choices. She deserves to know. I agree, David, said All Might. David paused for a moment, looking at Melissa. The resolve in her face was unshaken. Izuku took a moment to admire just how strong of a person she was. Not many people her age would be in any reasonable state after surviving an ordeal that she had experienced. After a minute, David nodded in resignation. It all started when you told me that you were losing your powers, All Might, said David. I couldn't accept it. The thought frightened me to my core. You are the #1 hero, the symbol of peace. If it wasn't for you, Japan would still be infested with villains and criminals as it was in the old days. For you to lose your power would bring untold catastrophe. A vacuum of power that would devastate the country. There are other heroes, other generations that would fill the gap, David, said All Might. But none like you, said David. The world needs you, All Might. So I worked tirelessly, obsessively, trying to find a cure for your condition, to enhance your powers so you could continue as the symbol of peace indefinitely. But even with the technology available to me at Island, I hit a wall. Nothing was working, and I had exhausted every legal avenue I could think of. David looked away ashamedly. That's when he contacted me, David continued. 6 months ago, I was contacted by Jack White, a supposed angel investor who was interested in furthering my research. One of Joker's oldest aliases, said Bruce. I didn't know it at the time, said David. He said that he believed in what I was trying to do, that the world needed All Might now more than ever. He had deep pockets and said he would fund my project, that he had access to technology unavailable to the current market. I was desperate, so I didn't ask questions. I figured the end justifies the means, if it meant getting you back to your full strength, All Might. Those funds and technology were all stolen, said Bruce. Commissioner Gordon provided me with a damaged laptop from the fire at Siona's building. Black Mask was supplying Joker with illegal technology and sending it directly to you for your experiments. Oh my God, said David, shocked. I had no idea. How could you do this? Said All Might. What's more, you experiment on human test subjects. That's horrible, David. They were volunteers, said David. It was supposed to be safe. But then, he paused, wiping away tears from his eyes. The experiments started to go awry. The formula increased the subject's quirk, strength and durability immensely, but at a severe cost, as you saw. Most of them were hospitalized, and others became monsters. You mean that thing at the warehouse? Said Izuku. That was created by you. How could you do this, Papa? Said Melissa angrily. The monster could have killed Izuku. What? What are you talking about? Said David, confused. The Joker unleashed a monstrous creature on Izuku in the Red Hood, said Bruce. Who is the Red Hood? Asked All Might. When I interrogated Harley Quinn, she mentioned the Titan formula, said Bruce, ignoring All Might's question. I hacked into your personal files on your computer on Island remotely, and managed to uncover your research notes. The monster from the warehouse matched the description of the monsters that were created in your experiments. My God, said David, a horrified expression breaking across his face. He's already using the formula. What was the device that he wanted? Said Bruce. The formula is still unstable, said David. I created a device that was meant to stabilize the transformation process. If the device is not used, and the antiserum is not administered, the formula will destroy the host's body. So there is a cure, said All Might. Yes, said David, in case the serum ever got out of control. Where is the device now? Said Batman. As soon as Melissa was taken, I contacted my lab aides at Island to send it here, said David. It'll be here by morning. We can't let Joker get his hands on it, said All Might. Bruce, All Might, said David somberly. Melissa, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I just wanted to help. Your intentions aside, what you did is inexcusable, said Bruce, standing. Bruce, said All Might. He's right, All Might, said David. I caused all of this. When this is over, you're to make a full confession to the proper authorities, said Bruce. But that will mean an end to everything he's worked for, said Melissa. We'll have to leave the Island. It's okay, Melissa, said David. I understand, Bruce. I want to make this right. What do we do? Asked All Might. When the device gets here, you need to destroy it, said Bruce. David, you need to make as much of that antiserum as possible. Use the laboratory in the Batcave. I'll provide you with everything you need. Right, said David. What about us? Said Izuku. We want to help, said Melissa. You are going to stay with your father, said Bruce. In the Batcave, where it's safe. As for you, he pointed to Izuku, giving him a glare that sent a chill down his spine. You're under house arrest. What? Said Izuku. What does that mean? It means that if you leave this house again, then I will send your ass back to Japan, and when you get there, I will withdraw my sponsorship of you and see to it that you are expelled from UA High, said Bruce. Master Bruce, said Alfred. You can't be serious, said Izuku incredulously. Dead serious, said Bruce. Bruce, isn't that a little? All Might began, but Bruce shot him a look that would make statues crumble, and he fell silent. Bruce turned back to Izuku. Make sure Melissa stays safe, said Bruce dangerously, and don't leave this house again. Without another word, Bruce put his cape and cowl back on, walking back down to the Batcave. A moment later, the Batmobile roared to life before fading into the distance as it drove off. The Batmobile roared as it sped down the deserted streets of Gotham City. It was still several hours before morning, but Batman did not want to waste time. For every second that passed, the Joker's trail grew colder. He was going to search some of his known hideouts to see if there was any clue to where he was now. The phone connecting to the Batcave back at the manor began to ring. What is it, Alfred? Said Bruce, answering it. Master Bruce, I just wanted to let you know that Master Shield has begun work on manufacturing the antiserum, said Alfred. He should have a viable solution in a matter of hours. Very good, Alfred, said Bruce. I feel that you were too hard on Master Midoriya, said Alfred. Not now, Alfred, said Bruce. Sir, I know that he disobeyed you, said Alfred. But expelling him from UA will not. He more than disobeyed me, said Bruce. He ran headlong into danger against the Joker without a plan, and nearly got himself killed. Sir, I know that this isn't about Midoriya, said Alfred. This is about Jason. I don't have time for this, Alfred, said Bruce, annoyed. I mean it, Bruce, said Alfred sternly. You cannot blame yourself for what happened. It wasn't your fault. I did this to him, said Bruce. I was the one who brought him into this life. I was the one who trained him. I was the one who got him killed. My plan, my mission, my fault. You cannot account for everything, said Alfred. You are just one man. Jason is now the Red Hood because of me, said Bruce. I won't let the same thing happen to Midoriya. Izuku is not Jason, said Alfred. Don't give me that, Alfred, said Bruce. You yourself have seen the similarities. Don't deny it. Alfred paused. Yes, he said. When Izuku came into our lives, it was as if Jason had never died. The more I think about it, the more I realize that I took him in to fill the void that was left by Jason, said Bruce. I selfishly pulled him into a life of danger so I could have my son back. There is nothing wrong with that, said Alfred. He views you as a father as well. And that's the problem. What? I've been treating him more like a father would a son than a mentor would a student, said Bruce. Just as I did with Dick. As I did with Jason. I hoped that by training Midoriya, I could erase where I failed them. You did the best you could, said Alfred. Jason died because of me, said Bruce. He was stolen out from under me, resurrected without my knowledge, and living God knows what kind of a life for 3 years. Now, he's a criminal, a murderer. Bruce grimaced at the word. Master Bruce, Alfred began, but was interrupted by Bruce. Jason was alive all this time, and I wasn't there to help him, said Bruce. I should have been there. That is not your fault, said Alfred again. But it is, Alfred, said Bruce. And so is what has happened to Midoriya. His mother was right. I promised him he would become a hero, but for all my work I have only painted a target on his back and led him down a path of blood. Bruce, please, said Alfred. Let me know when the antiserum is ready, said Bruce, disconnecting the call. Alfred leaned back in the chair in front of the Bat computer, his hand covering his eyes. Behind him, unbeknownst to him, stood the sickly thin personage of All Might, hiding behind one of the support pillars of the Batcave. His heart was beating quickly and he was struggling to control his breathing, shaken to his core over what he had just heard. He had come to speak with Alfred and had not intended to overhear his conversation with Bruce. But now it was all becoming clear. Why Bruce was so upset, young Midoriya's behavior, this mysterious Red Hood that he had mentioned, and why he was so quick to dodge his question during their conversation. He still could scarcely believe it was possible. Jason Todd is alive. It was clear to All Might in that moment what he had been denying ever since his fight with All For One. He had never felt as lost, so helpless, as he did in that very moment. The roaring engines of the Batmobile died to a still idle as it stopped outside the old Ace Chemicals building. Ace Chemicals had been in Gotham for decades and had long been associated with criminal ties, being a known hotspot for the trafficking of illegal and illicit materials. Bruce Wayne had petitioned to dismantle the company for years and had even made attempts to purchase it, but was refused each time by their board of directors. The company was nothing if not resilient. Batman used his grapple gun to enter the building through the access door on the roof. As he made his way down to the main factory, where they housed the large chemical vats, he was unwillingly filled with a sense of nostalgia. It had been years since he had been in this building, but he could still remember that fateful day, an APB over the police scanner about intruders. They were attempting to gain access to the playing card company that was next to it. 2 well-known criminals, and 1 rookie in a red-domed helmet and tuxedo. The 2 criminals were gunned down by security, but they were the lucky ones. Despite his attempts to save him, the hooded criminal fell into the toxic vats below. Fun memories, Batsy, came a voice from above him. Batman immediately drew a batarang from his belt, looking to the source of the voice. The Joker was on one of the platforms above him. Batman threw his batarang, but the Joker simply ducked beneath it as it crashed through the window behind him and flew off into the distance. Easy, Batman. I just got my hair cut. The Joker erupted in laughter. It's over, Joker, said Batman. S.H.I.E.L.D. is making an antiserum to the Titan formula as we speak, and you're going back to Arkham. Blah, 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 said Joker, forming a talking mouth with his hand and mimicking Batman's speech. I swear, Batsy, every time you get a new boy wonder, you spend less and less time with me. I mean, really, do I have to send another one to the farm before you'll finally get the picture that you shouldn't be keeping pets around? Batman used the grapple gun to launch himself upwards, colliding with the Joker and crashing out of the window. The Joker continued his maniacal laughter as he and Batman plummeted to the ground, hitting it hard. Batman stood, grabbing Joker by the shirt and landing blow after blow across his face. The Joker's laughter just grew with each hit. Why are you targeting Midoriya? Shouted Batman between blows. Because it's fun, said the Joker, spitting blood on the ground beneath him. Batman picked him up and threw the Joker into the wall of the building, punching him hard in the solar plexus, chest and face before throwing him back to the ground. That's it, said Joker, trying to crawl away. Get mad, get angry, knock me off, put an end to this once and for all. Here, I'll give you this one for free. He shakily rose to his feet and stuck his chin out invitingly. Batman heard a familiar sickening crack as his fist connected against the Joker's protruding chin, sending him down to the ground. The Joker's laughs continued, albeit weaker than they were before. Batman grabbed him by his throat and raised him up off his feet. "Tell me where the Titan formula is now," shouted Batman. "Better yet, Bats, I'll just give it to you," choked the Joker. Faster than lightning, he jammed a syringe in Batman's outstretched arm. Batman roared with pain before dropping the Joker, pulling the syringe from his arm. Immediately Batman began to swoon, his vision doubling. He dropped to his knee, failing to keep himself upright. "What's wrong?" said Joker, kicking him hard in the face. "Looks like something's not agreeing with you." "You won't win," said Batman. He felt as if his body was on fire. He could already feel a change come over him as his muscle fibers began to twitch and grow. "I've already won, Bats," said Joker. "Without Davy Pooh's device to stabilize the formula, and no antiserum to boot, I'm afraid you'll soon just be another pawn in Joker's army. But, hey, it's not so bad. After all, you'll get to experience firsthand the joys of leveling Gotham to a craterous ash pile. Won't that be fun? But make sure you save some innocent lives for your brothers and sisters." The Joker protruded what looked to be a remote detonator, pressing a red button in the center. Explosions formed all around them, Batman watching in horror as several buildings began to crumble. An armored car drove up beside them as several armed thugs opened the back door and the Joker climbed in. "I'd love to stay and see what happens next, Batman," he said. "But you know what they say, places to go, people to kill. Come on, boys. It's time for Operation Playtime." His laughs echoed from the car, dying slowly as it drove away. Batman shouted in pain as the serum worked its way throughout his system. "Alfred," he shouted into the comlink. "Sir, your readings are off the charts," said Alfred, alarmed. "What the devil is happening?" "The Joker, Titan formula," said Batman between yells. "The antiserum. Hurry." Batman doubled over as his body grew, his voice deepening. He felt his humanity begin to drift away, replaced only with a sense of rage. Rage and destruction. Explosions echoed throughout the Batcave as Izuku worked through the training simulator. One by one, more and more horde robots fell at the might of his quirk. He was angry, and the more robots he blasted, the angrier he got. Bruce had always believed in him, had trained him to be what he is today, and yet today he threatened to take that all away. How could he do this to him? Izuku propelled himself in the air, launching a howitzer impact on his enemies below him, destroying 20 robots at once. He hit the ground, rolling forward to a kneeling stance, pausing to catch his breath. He looked at his hands, which hurt from the blasts. Kaken's quirk was powerful, but it had never been this powerful. He remembered All For One said that he had tweaked it, using a few of his own quirks to amplify its power. He still couldn't believe that this quirk was now his. And if he was completely honest with himself, the exhilaration he felt when using his quirk was a rush that he had never experienced before. "Izuku," came a voice behind him. Izuku turned to see Melissa approaching him. "I'm not bothering you, am I?" "Not at all," said Izuku, shutting down the simulator. He walked over to the bench and picked up a towel, wiping the sweat out of his eyes. "How are you holding up?" asked Melissa. "I should be asking you the same question," said Izuku, surprised. "You're the one who got kidnapped tonight." "I'm fine," said Melissa. "I was worried about you. You seemed pretty angry after Bruce left." "I guess I was. Pretty angry still," said Izuku. "I don't know, maybe I'm more angry at myself." "What do you mean?" "I promised my mom that I wouldn't do any hero stuff on this trip," said Izuku. "That it was just for recuperating." Izuku formed air quotes with his fingers. "I know I broke my promise to her tonight, but when you were taken, I just couldn't." "I wasn't." Izuku paused, trying to formulate what he was trying to say. "I know how scary it can be to be kidnapped by a villain. I just didn't want the same thing to happen to you." Melissa said nothing, sitting next to Izuku, placing her hand on his hand. Izuku blushed slightly at this forward gesture. "You saved me, Izuku," said Melissa. "Papa and I will always be thankful to you for that. I'm sure that Bruce is proud of you as well." "I don't know about that," said Izuku. "I do," said Melissa. "Grown-ups are a lot like kids in many ways. The difference is they have to look like they have all the answers so we don't feel afraid. But I think they feel just as afraid as we do. I think that's why Bruce was so hard on you. He was afraid you would get hurt." "You think so?" said Izuku. "I do," Melissa replied. Izuku knew deep down she was right. The more he got to know her, the more he was amazed by her. She was so brave, smart and wise, stronger than Izuku would have ever guessed. "Young Midoriya." Izuku immediately recognized All Might's deep voice. He was running frantically over towards them, a coughing fit overcoming him once he reached them. They waited patiently as his breathing steadied. "Midoriya, something's happened," said All Might. "On the news, quick." Izuku watched in horror as the news report unfurled before him. A helicopter flew high above the city as dozens of the Titan monsters rampaged down below, destroying everything in their terrible wake. Buildings were knocked down, cars were destroyed, and people were killed left and right. "My God," said David, horrified. "This is all my fault." "What happened to Bruce?" said Izuku. "We lost contact with him," said Alfred. "Before we lost connection, the biometric readings in the batsuit were unfathomable. It was as if he was." Alfred paused, undergoing a metamorphosis. "You don't think," said All Might, though he knew the answer already. "It's a distinct possibility," said Alfred. "What about the antiserum?" said Melissa. "The first viable solution is ready," said David. "But it will take more time to produce more. We have to take the antiserum to Bruce," said Izuku. "We have to save him." "I've already contacted Master Dick," said Alfred. "But he is in Bloodhaven, and it will take the Batwing time to get him here." "We don't have that kind of time," said Izuku. "I'll go." "Young Midoriya," said All Might. "Izuku, you will do no such thing," said Alfred. "Master Bruce specifically." "Bruce has been turned into a monster," said Izuku. "I don't care if it does get me expelled. Bruce took a chance on me and made me what I am today. Bruce is." He paused, his voice choking, looking up pleadingly into Alfred's kind eyes. "He's more of a father to me than anyone has ever been. I have to save him. Please." Alfred took a deep breath. "All right," he said. The Joker and his men drove the armored van through the chaotic streets of Gotham, as the Titan monsters wreaked havoc around them. The Joker's laugh seemed to permeate even the deafening noise of the destruction. "Go, my pretties," he shouted to the beasts. "Destroy to your heart's content." Suddenly, something struck the side of the van, causing the driver to swerve slightly. "Boss," said the driver, "someone's shooting at us." "Oh," said Joker, coming up to the front and looking out the passenger window. The man in the red hood from the toy factory was back, sidling up to them on his motorcycle, carrying a large grenade launcher in his free hand. "It's the Red Hood," said the driver. "Oh, for Pete's sake, they'll give that name to anyone these days," said the Joker, rolling his eyes. "Back in my day it was classy, more flashy maitre d' than motorcycle fetish. These kids today." He grabbed the driver hard by the ear, causing him to yell out, "Will you be a good little boy and run him off the goddamn road?" The driver complied, trying to ram the side of the van into the Red Hood, but their assailant decelerated his motorcycle, causing the van to glance off a pillar from the side of a damaged building. "Do I have to do everything myself?" shouted the Joker, drawing a gun and shooting the driver in the head. As the car swerved, the Joker finagled the door open and kicked the dead driver onto the street, taking control of the out-of-control car. The Red Hood was upon them again, and the Joker fired his gun out the passenger window at him, causing him to duck and swerve out of the way. The Red Hood sped up, getting in front of the speeding van, firing the grenade launcher square beneath the bottom frame of the van, the resulting explosion upending the vehicle, causing it to capsize and come to a crashing stop. The Red Hood stopped, walking towards the wrecked van. The Joker pulled himself out of the wreckage through the driver window, laughing softly to himself as he rolled onto his back once free. The Red Hood stood over him, grabbing him by the shirt and punching him hard, knocking him unconscious. "Got you now, you son of a bitch," he said. Izuku loomed over the side of the building overlooking Ace Chemicals, where Bruce's signal was transmitted last before it stopped. He could see the Batmobile, but Batman was nowhere to be found. The building looked as if it had been hit by multiple steamrollers, each traveling at high speeds. He was surprised it was still standing. He looked down in horror at the devastation around him as the Titan monsters made short work of the city. He had to find Bruce fast. If he could just make sure he was okay, he would know what to do. He would set everything right. He's Batman after all. The Ace Chemical building seemed to shake on its foundation as a large crashing sound stirred Izuku from his thoughts. The crashing was getting louder, more frequent. Suddenly, bursting from the side of the building came one of the Titan monsters. Izuku blanched in shock as he realized, to his horror, that the monster was still wearing a shredded but familiar black, pointed cowl. "Bruce," Izuku whispered. The monster that was his mentor continued his destructive attack on the building. Izuku privately gave thanks to whatever gods were listening that the building was unoccupied. He clutched the pouch of his utility belt containing the serum. If he didn't hurry, the effects of the serum would tear Bruce's DNA apart. He had to get close enough to administer it, but he only had one shot of this. Any slip up, and he would be torn to pieces. Izuku leapt down from the building above, using his quirk to propel him towards Bruce. If he could get close enough without alerting him, he could administer the anti-serum. The monster reached behind him, grabbing onto Izuku with a large hand as if he was a wooden stick. The monster roared in his face and threw him back towards the building, causing Izuku to crash through the glass siding, hitting the ground hard inside an empty office. The wind was knocked out of him. He struggled to his feet just as the monster burst through the wall. "Bruce," shouted Izuku, throwing batarangs at the monster. "You have to stop. Come back to us." Bruce charged Izuku again, who used his quirk to simultaneously dodge the charge and blast Bruce in the face, stunning him. Izuku used his quirk to correct himself in midair, landing on Bruce's large, misshapen back. He drew the syringe from his utility belt, but a monstrous hand swatted Izuku off, knocking him aloft and causing him to hit the ground hard. Izuku was dazed slightly, realizing that he dropped the vial. He had to find it quick before a giant foot tried to stomp on him, but Izuku rolled out of the way just in time. Izuku cupped his hands together, causing a blast of light from his hand, striking the monster Bruce square in the face. "Stun grenade," shouted Izuku. This was one of Kaken's signature moves. He'd seen him practice it all the time when they were kids. Bruce clutched his face, stumbling and grasping blindly. Izuku crawled along the floor, looking for the vial of antiserum. He used his cowl vision to scan the area around him. If it was destroyed, there'd be no way he could have another one ready in time. His cowl vision alerted him that his target was within range. He found the vial under one of the office desks a few feet away. He would reach it in seconds. Hopefully Bruce was still. Something grabbed him by the leg and was pulling him away from the vial. Bruce regained his composure and grabbed hold of him, hoisting him upward. Izuku used his quirk and tried to blast Bruce in the face again, but this time he shielded his eyes and threw Izuku hard against the ground. Izuku lay motionless as the monster loomed over him. He didn't know how much more of this he could take, and Bruce seemed to be getting stronger, more vicious. His vision was blurry as he looked at the vial, still in its location underneath the desk. Izuku had no choice. It was time for his ace in the hole. He pressed a few buttons on his gauntlet computer and quickly rolled out of the way. Bruce turned as a light from outside the building began to shine on him. The sound of a roaring engine drew closer as the Batmobile burst through the open wall and plowed right into Bruce, forcing him back several meters through several walls in the building. The Batmobile engines died, and Bruce struggled to get up. Izuku seized his chance, grabbing the vial and lunging onto Bruce's back, plunging the syringe into his exposed neck. Bruce roared in pain, throwing Izuku off, but the vial had already been administered. Bruce's roars dwindled, and he stumbled as he struggled to stay upright. His misshapen muscles began to shrink, his voice slowly turning from the guttural growl back to normal. Soon, the monster Izuku fought was no more, and a restored Bruce Wayne lay motionless on the floor. "Bruce," said Izuku, rushing to his mentor's side, trying to wake him. "Bruce, can you hear me? Wake up." After a minute, Bruce emitted a small groan, struggling to lift his head. Izuku rolled him over. Bruce's eyes opened slightly, eyeing his protege before him. "Thought I told you. Stay in the mansion," he said weakly. "Yeah, well, you can expel me later," said Izuku. "Alfred." Izuku spoke into his comlink. "Master Midoriya, thank God," said Alfred. "Did you find Master Bruce?" "He's safe," said Izuku. "We're heading back now." Izuku heard an explosion from the other end of the comlink. "Alfred," he said, concerned. "Alfred, what's happening?" "Good lord," shouted Alfred, "the comlink going dead." "Shit," thought Izuku. "I have to get back there now." Alfred and All Might both sat tied to chairs in the Batcave, incapacitated. The explosion from the entrance to the Batcave had startled them all, and their assailant was upon them in seconds. Now it was only David left, trying to shield Melissa from their attacker. "You're the Red Hood," said David, shocked. "In the flesh," said the Red Hood. "Please, don't hurt us," said David. "Take me if you want, but don't hurt my daughter." The Red Hood leapt forward and struck David across the face, knocking him to the ground. "I don't want her, you idiot," he said. "You're the cause of all this. Everything that has happened tonight is your fault. You're going to burn for this, one way or another." "Jason, stop this," shouted Alfred. "Listen to him, son," said All Might. "You don't want to do this." "Shut up," shouted the Red Hood. "This is his doing. He was working with the Joker. People have died because of him. Now they're both going to pay for what they've." A large explosion erupted from beside him, sending the Red Hood careening towards the Batcomputer, smashing into it before hitting the ground hard. Melissa was standing over her father, the gauntlet on her hand smoking. "Don't come near him," she shouted. "Don't make me hurt you, little girl," said the Red Hood, standing and walking towards them. "It would make all the effort I went through saving you a waste." Melissa launched another blast, but the Red Hood was ready. Deftly sidestepping the blast, he grabbed Melissa's gauntleted hand and thrust the side of his hand hard onto her neck, knocking her unconscious. "Melissa," shouted David. "She'll be fine," said the Red Hood. "I can't say the same for you." "Jason, please," said Alfred. This isn't like you. The Jason Todd I know would never have. The Jason Todd you know is dead, Alfred, shouted the Red Hood, as will all of Gotham's criminals soon enough. He threw down a flashbang grenade, causing All Might and Alfred to avert their eyes. When the effects of the grenade had dissipated, both the Red Hood and David were gone. Alfred, All Might, Bruce and Izuku came running down the broken stairs leading to the Batcave. They quickly untied them, and Izuku rushed to Melissa's side. Alfred approached her and placed his hand upon her neck, which glowed a faint blue. He kept it there for a moment before taking it away. "She'll be all right," said Alfred. "But we must get her out of here." "What happened?" said Bruce. "It's Jason," said All Might. "He took David." "What?" "It's true, sir," said Alfred, hanging his head in shame. "I'm sorry, I couldn't stop him." "It's not your fault, Alfred," said Bruce. "I should have known this would happen." "What do we do?" said Izuku. Bruce eyed him curiously, and only then did Izuku realize that he had broken his promise to Bruce yet again. "Look," Izuku said nervously, "I know you said not to leave the house, but Bruce held up a hand, silencing him. "It's a hero's job to do what is right," he said, "even if that means that some promises get broken in the process. The night isn't over. We still have to stop the Joker and Jason." "So, not fired?" asked Izuku. "Not fired," said Bruce. "So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 7. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.